just kind of waiting, you know.
So everything's well,
No.
Okay. Okay.
No longer here. I'm kind of like, I'm not good at it.
Thank you all for being here. This is going to be a economic and budget planning focused work session. So thank you everyone for being with us. And Tom, thank you for being with us. It's always great to see you. But I'm gonna turn it over first to Mandy, I think, to kind of get us oriented about what we're going to cover today and to introduce Tom. So Mandy, take it away.
So I just wanted to begin from the foundation that y'all have spent a minimum of 3 hours a month in workshops and work sessions doing drill down areas as we move into the final legs of bringing your budget message in June. This comes to look specifically at the economy as it drives our revenue sources. And following Tom, the budget staff and tax staff and are going to give you an overview of some forecasting and trend data. And then Tim's going to talk about debt from that same perspective. So I think Rachel wants to give you instructions for the little write sheets.
Housekeeping, you all are very familiar with this process now. The Board of Commissioners, as you listen to Tom David's presentation about economic trends and drivers, please use these sheets to capture a few things. If you come up with any questions throughout the presentation, we will have a good amount of time for question and answer at the end. If you have ideas that come to you, make a note of those. But in particular, we want to encourage you to listen today for impacts to county budget, either on the opportunity side or on the risk side. So just kind of make a note at the top of the sheet. Is this a question? Is this an idea? Is this an opportunity or a risk? And we'll have a time to talk through some of those. And then we'll do a break. And then during the time of budget and finance are presenting the same thing, and then after that, we'll have some little question and answer discussion. So, sticky sheets.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. I love a group like this that's interested in the data and is going to use the data. And that being said, I've got, I think, 40 slides. I won't spend a lot of time on each one, but as I tell all my clients, I'm here for you. There's nothing here I'm trying to persuade you to do or nothing that I want you to change your mind on. I'm just here to inform you. So that being said, if there's something up here that you don't understand, I didn't arrange it right, put it up right, please interrupt and ask me, because it doesn't do me any good if you don't understand what I put. And it's all chartographed. And this is also groundbreaking for me in that I'm going to use my little stylus and actually try to draw on the screen, which is what I always dreamt to do, but none of my laptops at this one, and I have not had the option to do that yet. So we're going to briefly, and there again, I'm just going to hit the highlights. If you want to have more detail, I can either talk about it, or you can always talk to Rachel maybe, and I'll circle back and send you an email with some more detail on the subject. Population, employment and earnings, commuting, and housing and commercial activity. So let's start with population. That's always the easiest one. This is perhaps the simplest looking chart, but to me, it's one of the most impressive. It's just the population of Buncombe County, which has never lost population year over year in 47 years, which is as far back as we can go on the data. Now, why would that be important? When I look at the 100 counties in the state, 31 are losing population right now, almost a third, and they're in some tough times. As far as those that have grown and never stopped growing, there's only 13 others, or I'm sorry, 16 others, and they're all the big ones you might expect, Mecklenburg, Wade, big guys. So just by our total population, and if you're looking at planning ahead, I can pretty much guarantee you the population will go up next year, the population will go up the following 4 or 5 years. And the pace, we're going to look at the pace here. There's the annual average population growth rate. It's worked out. And if you look at the last 7 years, it did work out. We are growing faster than the state or the nation. And that's significant because we have only done that once before. It was only for 3 years back in the early 90s. So this is rare territory, growing faster than the state or the nation. And there again, I don't see that changing. The state, you can see, is coming up a little bit, but it's a little bit low. And nationwide, you can see that black line declining, which is why there's so much talk about migration lately, because this country increasingly will be dependent upon that migration, but right now that's not a concern for us. You probably know this as well, but that big bar there on the left, this is looking at population growth over 2010 to 2016, and you can see it's almost all domestic in migration. The red is foreign in migration, and the tiny one, which is much larger in most communities, is natural, which is births over deaths. But the storyline, which I think I'm going to change here, you'll see, was we were attracting baby boomers who obviously weren't having kids, and so our population was aging. This 90+% of our population from domestic immigration has been this way for at least the last 15, maybe 20 years. So this is what we are. We're always about attracting new folks in. But that little natural has gotten smaller, but I think when I look at some of the age groups that are moving into the area, we might see that changing. When I do the metro area, the 4-county metro area, Haywood, Henderson, and Madison have negatives to the natural. So this is the only place in the 4-county metro where we're actually adding people births over deaths. A little bit negative. But again, there's only 11% of counties in the nation in which domestic migration is the vast leader. And I'll try to explain this for you, but so who are we attracting? The blue bars are by age, the percentage of our current residents, Buncombe County residents. The orange bars are who we are attracting. This is over a period, by the way, I forgot to put on. I think this is 2011 through 2016. So any bar, such as this one right here, in which we're attracting 28% of the folks coming in are between the ages of 20 and 29, whereas our population is only 13% of that age group, meaning that group is growing significantly. Other groups, not so much. When I look at the baby boomers here, you can see that we're still attracting about 20% of the new folks. It's 11% and 9%, probably can't see there, are baby boomers, which is still not as much as a proportion of our existing, but we are still attracting that group. Now, to make a little more sense out of this, here's compared to the nation, I looked at all the new residents, domestic, people that had moved into a new county, what their age groups were. So you can see millennials, this is happening all over the nation. But what I thought was interesting as well was the baby boomers down here, we're still picking up more nationwide statistically, about 20% versus what's the nation, they're 5 and about 13%. We're still picking up baby boomers, it's a long story short. It's a complex chart, I hope that gets across. But the big story here is the millennials are coming, and they're making up about 28% of the new residents. So that group is going to be increasing over time.
So, if the millennials are increasing nationwide, this is maybe overly simplistic, where are they leaving? You know what I'm saying?
Where are they coming from?
Yeah.
Well, that age group just moves a lot anyway.
Okay.
And there's a lot of them.
Okay.
So when you think of yourselves, when you were 20 to 29, I'm sure a lot of us helped you because that is the age. So that group is always going to be a big mover, but there's a lot of them.
Okay.
In fact, it looks like they'll hardly more than a baby boom.
Okay.
So, and the importance, I think, for Buncombe is that we're attractive. Other places are not so much. I looked at Henderson County, which is, I look at Henderson sometimes as maybe they're 5 or 10 years behind where we were. They're still picking up the baby boomers, majority of baby boomers. I think their 2029 is like down to the 20% of that.
But to answer Alan's question further, do you have any idea of where they're coming from? I mean, an idea of Midwest, West?
I could look it up. You can split this up. I had one slide that you can say how many are from within North Carolina and how many are outside. It's about a 50-50 from within the state and outside the state. A little bit helpful. There's quite a bit of cross-county, people from Hayward moving here, people from Polk, back and forth. But Rachel, if you can maybe take a note for me, I'll try to circle back and give her the data. That's a good question, though.
Do you have that by ethnicity? What they are?
I think so. That's a good question. So let's see, we're already on the employment and earnings. I could spend a half an hour on just that. Here's the total employment. Again, this is one of those charts that sort of speaks for itself. The Citizen Times called me last week and they said, boy, we're really trying to write an article about if we made it out of the recession yet. And I said, I got a couple slides for you to see, because actually in 2013, we'd already replaced all the jobs in Buncombe County that were lost. So no problems here. Ever since 2013, we peaked past where we were at in 2008, which our previous peak was. You probably all know this. Let me just break it down here. Here's net annual employment change. This is the increase in employment, just the net. You can see that for the last 8 years we've been adding folks. 2015, for whatever reason, was a big year. We're going to see that through a few other slides. And you're also seeing there's a bit of a decline. So although we're growing pretty strong, that pace of growth for employment has come down a bit. Here it is. It's a percentage relative to the state and the nation. And there again, you can see that pretty much we're following what's happening by the state and the nation, except for these 2 years here, where we really had a burst of employment. But you can also see that the trend is down to slow in the world. I should have said in the previous slide, I'll backtrack a little bit. We're looking at percentages here. For population, our annual growth rate over the last 47 years is 1.2%. And as you may recall that slide, population growth, we're at 1.3%. And so I run into a lot of people and they're downtown and they say, oh, this building, boy, we're just booming population, just flowing in. We're really not, population-wise. We're right about where we're, 1.3 and 1.2 is right about the same spot that we've been over the last 40 years. We've only hit 2% a few times in the 90s, and we haven't gotten anywhere close to that. So as far as population, we're not necessarily booming on population. Obviously, employment goes up and down because we have a bit of community to talk about that. But that's
Also, and you might have mentioned absence, but the tourist visitor population has grown much
Oh,
faster,
absolutely.
right? So the number of people walking around the streets, it has jumped, but not all those people live here all the time.
Yeah. And I don't have the latest numbers on that. Actually, you can write that down. That's something the city loves. It's the number of daytime versus night, daytime versus resident population and the influx of people. So this is the one I want to spend a few minutes on. This is just the net growth, 2012 to 2017 in jobs, and trying to get to what you're talking about. Tourism. So as you can see, it's healthcare and tourism. That's really the major drivers. The top three here I consider retail, by the way, closely part of tourism as well. If you look at our per capita spending in retail, it's about 30% more here, meaning per capita we spend about 30% more on retail, meaning it's probably outsiders that are spending, it's not residents. The top, these are all industries in which grew, except for the bottom, which we'll talk about in a minute here. They've added more than 1,000 net new jobs since 2012. There's quite a few industries that you don't show. Real estate, financial services, trucking, warehousing. That's because they're all right here. They haven't done much. These are the big guys. These are the ones that are driving our economy, which makes it kind of simple for us. Because there's only a few. The top three account for 54% of all net new jobs. So healthcare, restaurants, accommodations, and retail trade, that's over half of all net new jobs. These 7 right here account for 85% of all net new jobs. So it's a fairly simple economy in that respect. Some communities I'm at, and they've got a dozen or more that are growing at once, but ours are relatively simple. Now, if you look at, you're probably just as interested in what's happened over the last year. And so the last year it's a little bit different because we've seen a decline in administrative services, which are temps. And what, this is anecdotal, they're telling me that a lot of those temps are becoming permanent because of the tight labor market, which makes sense. And interestingly enough, if you look at manufacturing, it almost mirrors the two. So it might be a lot of temps in manufacturing that are becoming permanent.
Is there data on how many small business employees versus manufacturers?
Yeah, there is. There's quite a bit. And when you look at the number of small businesses, we're a small business.
Right.
But all you need is a couple of large ones, and it sort of takes up the difference. So when you look at actually where people work, they're just as likely to work as a big and small. But the number of small usually growing.
Right, okay, yeah.
Also, a little sidebar here, the manufacturing that I sort of varied, I looked at the metro level manufacturing in the 4 counties end of last year, which was around 2 months ago. About 44%, here's an interesting fact, of manufacturing job growth was in beverages, breweries. So again, tourism, even though it's manufacturing, it's closely related to tourism. So tourism has a huge impact.
And Tom, is that growth in manufacturing over the last few years? I mean, it looks like it was flat for years, and now it's positive. I mean, I think there's just a general sense that that's around the state, around the country, that's kind of a even or negative. So how unusual is the fact that we've had several years of
It is.
growth in
I
manufacturing?
just looked at that this morning. I'll get the numbers. Rachel's going to be busy writing this down. We grew significantly more here than the state of the nation as far as manufacturing. And I don't remember. I apologize. I don't remember the number, but it was a big deal.
So that's interesting that beverages are included in that, so the beer industry.
Beer,
also.
wineries, distilleries, yeah. And that's, like I said, that's been almost half of the net increase at the metro. I checked to see the count, but
Is there
it's similar.
a breakdown of beverage versus other, as far as employees?
Oh, the other manufacturing?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think transportation equipment was like
Okay.
a big contributor in electronics. But, yeah. Good questions, and I wish I had an hour. You probably wish I didn't. So the next slide is going to go right into, so what does this do to wages? We can spend a lot of time on this. So let me explain what this says. This is a 5-year percent of the total employment gains in Buncombe County by their average industry earnings. And so I looked at the industries up here, and I broke them all down into their subcategories. So there's 76 industries, and I looked at the ones that pay the lowest. I did the lowest quartile, which is right here, which would be employees making less than $27,000. The middle, 50% is here, and then the top, which is 51,000 or more. Now, the first thing you should know that although we've had growth growth of 45% of the net new jobs were in these low income or low bottom earning industries. That's actually 32% of all employees. So 32% of the employment base, but the growth has been 45% of the net new jobs. So there's going to be more of those low wage earners. If you look at the group down here, that's 45% of the existing, 34% of the new. And then up here, 23%. So 23%, I hope this makes sense, of existing workforce, but it only grew by 21%. Seems to be proud. Does that make sense? So the point is, this is where the growth is. This is where things have been happening over the last 5 years. And this is where it's not happening. And I'll give you some examples of the industries here in a minute.
So the risk then, is the thing about risk is in terms of what that does for support services.
Yeah, so there's going to be more people, if this continues. Or right now, there is relatively more growth in low wage, so there'll be more low wage households, I would suspect. Is that what you think? And that's kind of a no-brainer, really.
And that's 27,000 or less.
No, this is everybody here. I'm sorry.
Okay,
This
okay.
is the whole ball.
Okay. Okay.
And here's what we're talking about, just so you know. I picked the top 3 growth industries for each one of these. And so bottom earning industries, surprise, surprise, restaurants, which I think is about 3,000 jobs, food and beverage stores, grocery stores, it's about 960, and then clothing and accessory stores, those 800. So retail and tourism for those jobs. For the middle group here, middle earnings, hospitals, the big one, about 1,500 administrative services, which I've already told you that's going to decline. That was 1,500 jobs. And then what's called specialty trade contractors, which would be roofers, site preparation, masonry, even I think plumbing is in there, sort of your average contract job. That's where the growth for the middle earning industries. And then the top is back to healthcare, ambulatory healthcare services, doctors, nurses, labs, chiropractors, and that kind of service. So you can see on the middle and high, you've got healthcare by the dominant growth. It gets back to my slide before. Professional, scientific, and technical services, just FYI. That is consultants, engineers, architects, which actually over the last year we've seen a bit of a decline in that group. That's always been when I was the chamber, that was always where the goal was. We're going to attract these professional, scientific, and technical services industries, but it just hasn't panned out to the degree that a lot of people expect. And investment services, I think you probably recognize. So here is probably a slide that you've all seen before, but it's probably worth sharing. And that's just compared average monthly earnings to the state, the nation, and Buncombe County. We're about 20% below, and it's really hard to tease out a trend as far as are we narrowing that gap. The best I can do is about 1/3 of a percent point gain per year. So there is a bit of a gain, but if you took it to the point we're about 20% different, that means it'd be over 100 years before we gained, and I'm sure they're not going to take away for us to gain. So that's sort of a hard pill to swallow, but it is part of who we are, and it doesn't change that dramatically from year to year. And digging down into that, as far as this is all work, by the way, folks that are actively working, this is by race and ethnicity, and you can see that it's somewhat shocking here. Black workers are making about 1/3 less, about 8% of the workforce. Hispanic about 1/4 less, they're about 5% of the workforce. And shockingly, the black workforce is actually spreading a little bit apart. So they're not catching up. I have another slide that shows that. Hispanics have, Hispanic employment, sort of stereotypical, are in overwhelmingly in healthcare and construction, and so they have benefited more recently from the recent growth, far as their earnings, but it's only a portion of a percentage. I put in Asian just because it's so unusual, although in our workforce, there's only 2,000 Asian workers, and in American Indian, there's only 700, which I'm surprised how low that was. Here it is by gender. It's about 27–30% difference here. And this is narrowing. It's moving up about 1/4 to 1/2% a year. And I know I've drilled into these. Female employment is heavily weighted towards healthcare and education, and male is heavily to manufacturing and construction, and most of the other.
Do you have one for black women?
No. I mean, I don't know if I can. I'll have to look at my notes. You can, sometimes you can't do two, you can do black or you can do women, but you might not be able to do black.
Gotcha.
Do we have data, drill down data available to compare salaries within the same sector by gender? So we can see men in healthcare, women in
Oh, yeah,
manufacturing.
yeah.
Is that available?
Mhm. Well, I do recall that female workers are paid less than every single thing.
82 cents to the dollar typically, but when they're locally.
No, that was local numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'll get that. The data is available. And then I looked at over the last 5 year average annual change in monthly earnings, and this is the nation and state, which is 2.3. So you can see there has been some growth, not a tremendous amount, but we're keeping up. We're not falling behind, except for these two groups, which in fact are falling behind. By the way, this is not adjusted for inflation. I looked that up, and so inflation is 1.3. So inflation's like right there. So there's nobody's making a huge bunch of money anywhere, nation, state, or locally. But at least there are some positive movements, although they're only a slight few percentages. So let's go into committee. We're doing good on time here. I know that's been an issue, and it's unique in this area for several reasons. So you can see that living and working is coming up. That's one thing I want to point out. This is only 2015, by the way. That's the most a little frustrating. In 2013, this was a peak right here where we had 42% of workers in Buncombe County were driving in. Now, when I was giving talks and looking at this, I would say, in a few years, it's going to be over half the people working in the county are going to be outsiders. But you can see the interesting thing is this has changed. So the working and living in Buncombe County, that actually, the most current year, that increased by 5,000. So that's a fascinating question, why that is. Those people were driving from outside and now they're living here. So something's changed, and we have a few slides we may get to that. And then I think as interesting is this group of end commuters. There's fewer of those. There's about 2,000 less of those. So that's a real change in a trend that's we've been going on for at least a decade. And I think probably one that probably most of us would like to see. That being said, when you see the peak was actually back in 2005, when we actually had the most live and work in the county. So we're not quite there, we're almost there yet. But as you know, the county is growing a whole lot from that point. And a little bit of a decline here in our community too, which I'm sure are probably these folks up there. And they're coming from Henderson County. Pretty flat line, everybody else. I live in Haywood County. Not a lot has changed there, and McDowell's actually declining a little bit. I did a project for the Henderson County Commissioners probably been 3 years ago, and their economy was at that time, and I wouldn't be surprised if it hasn't. They had not regained their jobs. Like we had regained our jobs here. Like I said, by 2013, They had not, but if you look at their community numbers, that's because they were coming here. So they had, they couldn't find work in Henderson County after the loss of jobs there. So many of them decided to come to Buncombe County. So that was sort of the relief valve for that county. And then I looked at the net worker inflows by industry, meaning importing workers. And it's virtually every industry. The only one that doesn't show up here is one I didn't talk about earlier, and that was educational services that I showed in that one slide. It was declining, and I forgot to mention, the declines that I showed in that slide probably are not significant. And I'll just take a little segue to talk about educational services. Educational services is public and private. And private employment in educational services has gone up by about 500 jobs. On the public side, it breaks out into local and state. State would be, I guess, UNCA. That's up about 100 jobs. But local employment and educational services, public, is still down by about 150 jobs. So that's the only one that really hasn't caught up. I don't know why. There's probably some of you that might understand that better than I do. But that's actually the only group. There's 127 people in educational services that drive out of Buncombe County for their jobs, which sort of makes sense because that area has actually shrunk a little bit. The rest of these are all up, and this is the number that we're importing. So we're importing a good bunch of people, and we'll probably continue to. And then there were some questions I know I had heard about. This is a really confusing chart, and I'll make sense of it. Travel time, all this in commuting and out commuting, doesn't that mean that people are spending more time on the road? And so I looked at 2011. This is the amount of time. These are minutes over here that you spend on the road to get to your job. And it's hard. This jumps out. It looks like a big change right there. But we have changes in the other direction here. So I'm going to write the average median time, the average time that people spend on the 2011, a Buncombe County resident spent 20.2 minutes driving to work. In 2016, they spent 20.4. So it hasn't changed a whole lot. If I was doing this in Henderson County, it'd be a big difference. But overall, travel time to work has not changed a whole lot over this recent 5 years. And FYI, it's still about 76% of workers are driving to work by themselves in a car. And that hasn't changed much either. This is we're doing good on time, by the way. This is kind of a wild one here. There's some stuff here. I've never sat down and accumulated all the permit data into one spreadsheet, so I'm going to share that with you. And the word shocking might be too strong, but some of this data is pretty explosive. Here's retail sales, and you can see, by the way, these are months, so you can see Christmas. This is why I tell reporters you never can report what happened in January versus December, because it always drops. And you can obviously see the trend, but this little small chart down here at the bottom overlaid it is the percentage change on a 12-month moving average. And so you can see that retail sales has been still up by about 5%. It's declining now. And if you were to look back at my employment numbers, there's that 2015 where it kind of peaks. So retail sales, although it's larger year over year, the pace of that growth has been declining. Can't say exactly why, but don't think it's just that retail sales are booming and going up. They're actually sort of moderating. And here's the numbers that really are. This is total permit value. So this would be all the permits in the unincorporated Buncombe County, and it would also be any new structures within the city that Buncombe County owns. So the new Buncombe County Health and Human Services building, that would be in here, and there'd probably be a few others, but nothing too major. And you can see that there's a new world we're at here. I'm going to give you an example here. So the average monthly permit value, now this is, I'll break it down in a few slides in the future here, but commercial, multifamily, and single family, that's basically what's in here, plus you've got some smaller groups as well. But the average monthly between 2010 and 2013 was 15.4 million per month. Good amount of money. So what is it going 2013 to today? It is 36.5 million. So the story is it's double. And remember, a lot of this stuff is on paper. A lot of it is still being worked. You know, it hasn't worked its way up, and we're not seeing it all yet. So this I can say we're going to see a lot more continuing of very strong construction activity. And it's double what we were in previous years. You can see this as well in the different categories. Remember, this is 6-month moving, so there's a lot of peaks right here that you wouldn't see if I did month to month, but it's just too busy. And let me give you some examples of the differences here, which again are pretty shocking. So, multifamily. Is this working? I kind of like working that much. I don't have to remember a lot of these numbers. Monthly was about 800,000 before 2014. Multifamily now is 1.7 million average per month. So getting near triple for that number.
Permit value?
I'm sorry?
Permit value?
Yeah, permit value. Yeah. So it'd be the value of the building.
Value.
And I have a following slide, we'll get into units actually. And then single family was about 8.2 million. But right now, we're looking at 19.6 million. So again, more than double. And then finally, commercial, which you can really see as boom. Commercial, the average commercial previous was 4.7 million per month in Buncombe County. So that was 4.7 million, and now commercial is 11.8 per month. That's a huge jump there. So sorry for my scratches, hopefully it made sense. But everything has doubled or more per month on average. This is a 6-month moving average, which spreads it out, but if you were to put month per month, it explodes out that way.
Is that reflective of the quality, or is it the cost of materials, or can it be both?
Yes, I don't know, really. What a combination.
I was looking at what we constructed. You look at AB Tech and everything that we constructed in that area, up in that, the upper group. We constructed a lot of new buildings in that period.
I won't draw on this slide much, but commercial is, there's two pieces of commercial, which actually sort of mean two different things. New is what you would think it is, it's new. And the commercial additions and alterations are working on what's already there. And the reason I show this, I've been in some communities that have a lot of commercial and it's all new, and some that it's just the other way around. But you can see, at least most recently, there's a lot of additions and alterations of existing. It's online. Because I know that property values are hard, and so people end up buying and redoing what they already have. Now here's units. I think this is what you were talking about. This is quarterly units. And again, the big picture here is a huge number of multifamily units. Over the last 2 years, I counted up the number of single family and the number of multifamily, and they were almost identical, about 1,700 new units in each group. And looking back, we've never had anything for that. We've had a quarter maybe, but never 2 years of that. So a real surge in multifamily, I would suspect probably the biggest surge ever. I can go back a few years here, and don't pick up anything like that. Here's monthly foreclosures, still in the housing side of things. These are down to the teens, by the way, the months. This would be a reflection of the stress on houses. And so this would say people are buying homes, but they're able to buy homes and they can afford to buy homes. I have this data going back to 1998. This is the lowest it's ever been. Some of the months in the past, if I wrote this down, for years. So right now we're on pace to have about 250 foreclosures for the year of 2017. In the previous bubble years, we were up to about 1,200 per year. So a huge change there. In spite of all the new building and the new household residential activity going on, there's not a lot of pain, at least at the foreclosure level. And so if someone says, are we getting ready for a bubble? There's no sign of a bubble here at all. But this looks very healthy. Here's existing home sales. The red line is the average price, which obviously you can see it's going up, and then the bars are the quarterly number of homes to sell. And this chart just sets us up for the next chart. So what I did is I looked at year-over-year change by quarter, and so what this says is prices are going up, almost double-digit, but the number of homes is going down. I just so happened I picked up my mail at my P.O. box on the way here, and Beverly Hanks has a quarterly real estate report, and they show 1 to 2 months of inventory for homes $400,000 or less. So an incredibly tight market. I don't know if we've ever been this tight before. And those are those are pretty healthy prices there, you know, imagine 13% more. This is my shot at big data. I just went to Zillow. Zillow is great in that they give away their data. Some of the other organizations don't do that. And this is the 60 counties in North Carolina in which they've collected enough data to have monthly home sales. And you can see, this is sort of what I would say would be the pack. And these are the high flyers. And as you can see, Buncombe County is, whether it wants to be or not, is in the high flyer. So I think that's Dare County, Orange County, and Chatham are above us. You can't see it, but Wake County is right behind us there. But a real, and I don't think you can find any other line on there, those other counties, that shows this sort of movement. We've gone from 8th in the state to 5th in the state as far as the median home value. So pretty dramatic jump there. And then those of you that are interested in rent, this is 81 counties, and it's the same sort of picture. We went from the 12th highest to the 6th highest. And again, I think you've got Chatham, top, Orange, and Wake. So you've got communities out in the Outer Bank and the communities that are, you know, within Raleigh, Durham areas that are very high, relatively high earnings. This is a federally produced number, same home appreciation whenever Fannie Mae or Fannie Mac revalues a house because either it's sold or somebody's getting a new mortgage on it. They look at the value of that home. And so you can see that over the last 3 years, homes have been appreciating here greater than in the state or the nation, although it's still like 8 or 9%. In the past, we got all the way up to 13% before the big bubble. But we had 4 years of negative. You might not have known that, but we had 4 years of home value, declining home value, which we're way past that right. And this is third party. This is the National Association of Home Builders. So I don't know how they came up with these numbers. It's supposed to be, they look at household income and they say what they would estimate the number of folks that could afford a home. And so the point of this slide, as you can see, affordability is declining. I think we're at 58% of homeowners or home households are able to afford a home, which has been declining since 2013, which is probably no surprise. And then the last few slides, we're doing really good on time, by the way, a little bit of a puzzle, but I think you should probably see it, especially because I know you're all interested in home affordability. This is households with housing costs that are greater than 30% of your household income. These are, HUD calls these homes a housing burden, meaning that they can barely afford to live where they're at. And huge drop. I think it's about 4,000 or more households, renter households, dropped off the affordability being house burden, cost burden. Now, I look at these numbers all the time, and the first thing that I think of is somebody got it wrong. So I looked at this data, and it had a margin of error, 90% plus or minus 1,000. So even if you went 1,000, it's either here, somewhere down here, or somewhere up here. It's still a big change. There's been something significant that happened here. Now, I look back at the multi-family permitting and think maybe we're seeing that. Maybe this is the first signs of actually, and less people driving outside and staying here. So that might be the first signs of what all this building is actually doing, which is awesome. Do you understand this? Slide forward to the next one.
Yeah, could you just walk through, could you narrate it one more time?
Yeah, so this is the number of, and these are renters and owners that spend more than 30% of their income on housing.
Right.
Which is meaning unaffordable. The housing is, they're stressed. And it's dropped between 2015 and 2016. It dropped, I think, by about 4,000, which is pretty significant.
But some of that has to do with basically, well, not right there, but the way the property tax, the value of the property tax has gone up, especially in areas like West Ashland and stuff. Then the people that rent the property are having to charge more to cover the property taxes.
Yeah, but wouldn't that mean their cost would go up, the renter's cost would go up? Wouldn't the renter's cost?
The renter's cost would have to go up, that's why it's falling. They can't afford to rent.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, so there's all sorts of hypotheticals. You could say they moved out of the area, they're driving in from Henderson because they couldn't afford it. It could be a negative. I'd like to think that because of this unusual amount of construction, that, maybe we're seeing some of that too, that they're able to have more affordable housing. But it's hypothetical. I don't know. I did check and see, so how does this compare to the state of the nation? And, the number of owner-occupied, percentage-wise, looks like it is nationwide. A little bit lower as Florida, but not a big difference. And then I went one step further and looked at by income. And so this is all about those who are earning less than, households earning less than $20,000. Doesn't really answer the question, but that's where the real movement has been. And a movement for the positive, we think, unless they're not living here, but we don't have any indication that we'll have that movement. So less homes, cost burden with the lowest group. Can't answer specifically. I would say that it might have something to do with a multifamily need. So we're doing so good on time. Here's my summary, and then anytime we have here, we can take a few more minutes. The strong and solid population growth continues. That's that you can put in the bank. We're very fortunate in that respect. Not pacing the state and nation for the last 7 years. Domestic in-migration, it's always about people moving into the area. That's the history of Buncombe County and Western North Carolina. Is our population growth is 90% or more because of people moving in. And fortunately, in Buncombe County, we're seeing about 28% of those people are millennials. So I know my years in the chamber, there was always a concern that what's going to happen when the baby boomers run out. And they are running out, and we're still attracting them, but we've replaced them, more than replaced them, with millennials. And it's not been experienced in the surrounding counties, by the way. So I live in Haywood. I wouldn't have this conversation in Haywood because they're older and they're attracting more wealthy folks. Still. We've had 8 years of job growth, but it has been declining or slowing down in the last few years, still positive. Healthcare and tourism by far dominate job growth. And unfortunately, low earnings jobs also, 45% of the net new jobs were in low earning industries. And the gaps in minority and gender earnings are persistent. And there's not a lot of movement at the aggregate level. And we are seeing earnings gains, fortunately, which are greater than the state of the nation. In commuters, it's playing a strong role, but it looks like there's a trend where that may have turned around a little bit. That's something that caught my eye. Interesting major source. In Buncombe County, outside of a couple hundred people that drive out for educational services, it's important workers for all the other sectors. Permitting activity surges. I almost used the word boom. I'm always afraid to use that word, but it's across everything. Everything's double or more previous to 2013. The housing market is incredibly tight. As I said, when I read this morning, 1 to 2 months of inventory or anything below $400,000, and prices and rents, as my big data slides show, keep climbing, not only to ourselves but relative to the rest of the state. And the affordability signals are mixed. We've got a lot of building. We've got obviously the census numbers showing that there's a reduction in the number of people that are cost burdened, but there's some other data that doesn't fit that as well. So, thank you. And I'd love for any questions.
Does your data show that, or maybe you don't want to answer this, but then I'm going to ask it. Does your data show, or has it been proven, that indeed short-term rentals interfere with affordable housing?
I don't have any data, actually. That's a question, but I don't.
Do you have data on the amount of short-term rentals?
I would just have to go to, does the city keep track of that? Does the county keep track of that as well? So there's no federal or state agency.
There's no permit required in the county, right? So we wouldn't track it because people aren't required to tell us, right?
Now, I know I've done some work on hotel motel sales, which is now part of that. So that they do have published data. I know it's a huge number. Anything, and I know your time is precious, I don't want to waste it. Was there anything that jumped out? The permitting really surprised me, actually. I didn't realize that was so.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bad trends on the economic side, for sure. The housing affordability stuff, that's really interesting and kind of encouraging. I mean, it seems like all these new apartments that are being built and coming online, I mean, it seems like intuitively that's got to be, part of it is like, there's got to be some competition there where they're having to kind of get tenants in and offering a little bit better deals. But it'd be interesting to see if there's a way that can be fleshed out. I mean, I know there's a lot of concern around this kind of incredible growth of the apartment developments, just from a kind of a land use and growth management standpoint. But if it is helping in that way, I mean that's kind of been the hope, is that you know, that bringing all these additional units online will help the market meet that need in a little bit more affordable way. So as that trend continues, that can be kind of confirmed that really is what's going on there. That would be great.
Yeah, I would love to see one more year of data, you know, to see if that confirms.
I think you had it once before, but the percentage of people paying rent when they're in 27,000 and less of their income, do you remember what that was?
From this presentation here?
Or
No, I don't remember. I know, Mandy, remember I did a pretty deep dive on housing. That's probably what you're thinking of. I can look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we looked at by race, by age,
Right.
a lot, and it wasn't very positive about it at all.
No.
But actually, we have another year of data
It'd be good to go back and,
Yeah, I'd like to see it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to update it.
but Brownie's right, maybe with competition with the apartment building.
Yeah, maybe that's good. So if you're saying that's a possible reason for that blue line drop.
It's a guess. I don't know what else would be it. You know, we know it's not, they're not, it's not, it doesn't look like it's because they're moved somewhere else and driving in, because those numbers don't jive either. So that's an idea. You know, I'm always afraid to just throw something out there without really knowing for sure. But something happened, or is happening with that group. And you know, when I look at the other side, supply is increasing on multifamilies like that.
It'll be good to know how many apartments have come online.
Yeah, that's the other thing, a permit is a permit, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's actually a housing yet. And I don't know, maybe we would know the average time from issuing a permit to actually opening the door, what that turnaround time is. Well, thank you very much, I appreciate it very much.
Thanks so much, Tom. Great job. All right, so we've got 15 minutes scheduled for a break, so let's take a break, and we will start back promptly at 1:45.
Welcome. Did you want some lunch?
So we always appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about budget, and today we'd like to cover some key budget trends and drivers, and then end with a discussion about fund balance from both the budget and the financial perspective. So before we get started, I just kind of wanted to point out that we're still really early in the FY19 timeline. We have so many key things left to do. I know Rachel just got the applications for the strategic partnership grants. We're analyzing the departmental and capital requests through March. We have some key revenue estimates that we don't get till March, and of course the state budget for education, which is a big driver. We don't get till May and sometimes into June. So today we really wanted to go over the trends, and the FY19 information will come later. So presenting on the budget with me today is our tax assessor, Keith Miller, tax collector, Director Pike, budget manager, Jen Chilton, and budget analyst, Matt Evans. I think Matt's going to start us off on the
Sub in for a second. So I wanted to talk about the portion that I'm going to be discussing on the revenue side. Is the whole talk here is the economy, economics, trends, influences. So we picked four, one heavy, one medium, two on the lower end. Property tax being the heaviest portion of the revenues that we bring in as a county. Sales tax, medium size, but we needed also the most volatile. Excise stamp tax, one we don't focus on too much, except for today, and you guys are in luck. And then permit revenue, which we're going to graze on because Matt's coming later in another work session, I believe, to talk permits, trends, forecasts. So I'm just going to kind of touch that so we can move with it. Pass it over to Keith.
Thank you, sir.
Very well.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. So I'm always happy to get to talk to anybody that will listen to me about tax. Not many people want to hear about tax, so I appreciate you guys listening. So one thing that I hope to accomplish here for you today is I want to go through some of the process and help you maybe have a better understanding of what is in ad valorem tax, what does it mean to us, and what key components of this make up the whole. Where does it come from? Where's the risk involved in it as we move forward in thinking about budget, tax rates, and so on. So ad valorem tax is made up really of 5 components. The first being the largest, real estate, 124,000 parcels currently, and that includes residential, commercial, industrial, multifamily, and vacant land. The second one, individual personal property, which is your manufactured housing that's on land not owned by the homeowner, boat trailers, boat motors, utility trailers, utility buildings. The third, business personal property, tangible business assets, computers, office equipment, machinery. Fourth, public service companies. And the fifth, registered motor vehicles.
Pete, just one thing real quick, you said it very quickly, but manufactured housing is on private property is taxed as real property.
That is correct. When you're the landowner and the homeowner and you meet the criteria, it is taxed as real estate rather than personal property. That's correct. So these are the 5 components that make up your ad valorem tax valuation. So I want to touch just briefly on each one of them. We'll talk about what's in them and kind of where I feel that some risk may be involved and what you should maybe consider as you move forward talking about the budget. So again, residential, commercial, industrial, 87% of the 58% that Matt showed you. So 58% of your revenue is coming from property tax, 85% of that 58% is coming from real estate alone. And that's the land, the structures, improvement on the land. 2017 total valuation there was $31.2 billion. You can see here what's happened since 2004 in that residential value. We noted on here the years of the reappraisal, so you can see where the values increase and why they're increasing. So one thing that I will point out here that everyone should recognize is that starting in 2006 when we did the reappraisal, 2006 starts, that's the benchmark for you. Wherever we end up with value, that's where the value basically will stay until we get to the next reappraisal. So what you have in between there is just growth. There's no real reassessment. The law does not allow us to reassess property in the non-reappraisal year. The only thing we can do is pick up the new value and add the new value for growth. So as you hear even in the talks here this morning, as the economy does increase, you'll see the values start increasing just for growth. So what's risky there is if the growth remains, then your revenue increases every year because of the growth, and then you can offset any additional costs that the county may have related to services. However, the risk is that the growth either slows, stops, or even goes in the other direction. But what you can be assured of is that until you do the next reappraisal, you will still be at that benchmark where we started in 2006. You should never drop back anywhere below that. So we go to 13. You see what happened in 13. We were here because of the recession. We dropped back in 13, so that brings your overall value somewhat back. You lose some of that value that we gained during those growth periods for construction. And from 13 to 17, you can see that we've had a steady growth. 16 to 17, the next reappraisal, we had good growth. And that was overall market changes, okay? Not related to growth or construction. That was overall market changes. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's talk a little bit about, it was mentioned here a few minutes ago, that the median sales price now, I think, was published as of January 1, 2017, to be at about $275,000. We've had pretty consistent growth and appreciation in homes, 10, 12% across Buncombe County. So that brings that median sales price up, $275,000. And that's what you realize when that happens from 16 to 17 during the reappraisal. This is the commercial, same years, same reappraisal years. You see in 2006 we had that growth in commercial because of construction. 13, interesting enough, 13 didn't draw back a little bit on the value like residential did during the reappraisal. Commercial, we noticed at that time stayed somewhat flat, wasn't getting a whole lot of growth, wasn't a whole lot of change in rental rates. However, the sales prices, unlike on residential real estate, held pretty good. So then we continue to grow into 17, and you see somewhat that same change, that same trend from 16 to 17 as the value changed for that reappraisal cycle. Industrial, you heard also the mention of this earlier, and this has been interesting to us, that unless you saw this on a graph, you would never really probably realize that this really happened. But from 14 to 17, we've done nothing but really with this. Now, the value's not huge. Okay, you're still talking about from 220 million to 320 million. But I will support what was said here earlier, is that most of that came from beverage. Okay, New Belgium's new warehouse, these top things that got added during that period, that there wasn't a whole lot of what I would term as manufacturing, but it was more or less more beverage related to that growth. So the next component, business personal property. This is all your business assets. So if you're operating a business, and what you should tell us every year on a listing form is what is the value of your computers, your office furniture, and the equipment and the machinery. You should be listing that with us for taxes. $1.7 billion was the total valuation for 2017, and that come from about 8,500 accounts that we assessed from that value. You can see the business personal property only makes up about 5% of the total 85% of the value. Here's the trend for business personal property. And what's interesting here, I don't know if you remember that Tom was showing you a slide that showed you some growth, and it almost mirrored this slide here. Because as you see that growth, that change in 2011 from the recession, a lot of small businesses going out, restaurants closing, we were losing business value at that time. But then we start climbing back out of it and come back to 2017, and 16 and 17 stayed somewhat flat. So again, risk here is kind of what you've already realized from the last recession. As long as the economy stays good, as long as businesses keep opening, as long as we get new apartments, as long as we get new hotels, then you will see this continue to steadily climb. Individual personal property, 128 million total valuation for 2017, 12,000 accounts that produce that value, 0.36% total of the 85% makes up here. Again, this is not registered motor vehicles. This is boats, campers, utility trailers, and your personal property, manufactured housing that makes up this. This is the trend for that. And you will see, again, we had that somewhat of a decline in 9, 10, into 11, and then we started coming back out of it. Again, very much tied to the economy. How many new motors people are buying, how many new campers people are buying, utility trailers. So when the economy slows, when unemployment drops back, people are not buying these kinds of things because these somewhat are, not everybody needs a camper, so on. Public service companies. Give you some examples. Makes up 1.7% of the 85%. So these are the companies like Duke Energy, Public Gas, Bell South, AT&T, your airlines. I put Allegiant Airline up there as an example for you. Duke for 2017, 367 million. Public Gas, 63 million. Bell South, 45 million. AT&T, 13 million. Allegiant Air, 1.1 million, for a total of $613 million in valuation for 2017. That comes from 340 accounts or 66 individual companies that is assessed as a public service company by the North Carolina Department of Revenue. This is the trend for that value. You can see it stayed somewhat flat until 2014. We had a little bit of a jog in the value there, from 14 to 15, and then we've had another little increase in the value from 16 to 17. And some of that, again, is these folks making investments. 14 to 15 was the year that cellular towers, cellular companies started to list as a public service company. We used to assess them locally, but in 14 it went to the state. Now the state assesses them as a public service company. So public service took a little bit of a jog up there to show that new value that they took. Again, economy, very receptive to the economy. If the economy comes back, if Duke Energy doesn't invest any money in their facilities, if Verizon don't put any new towers in, if these top things are not happening, then you're not going to see growth here in your public service companies. The public service companies are a little bit different in how that operates, such as Duke Energy. You're not getting dollar for dollar in value as they put money into the plant out of Lake Julian, because it looks at more of a unit value for the state of North Carolina, and then we get our portion out of that based upon the formula we use. Motor vehicles. Now, motor vehicles, as you know, is assessed as tag tax came a few years ago. Now you pay your property taxes when you renew your tag. So those are collected by the North Carolina Department of Revenue. 247,856 motor vehicles billed to date. That's how many we will bill in one each year of 247,000 vehicles. That's $2.2 billion in total valuation for 2017. We did see an increase there. Again, You see what happened in 2011? We started feeling the results of the recession. People weren't buying new vehicles. People may have even been moving out of the county, taking their vehicles with them, not registered in Buncombe County any longer. Then it starts coming back, and then we get a big influx there from 15 to 17. So again, this is also, Todd, you heard Tom talk a little bit about population. As population increases in Buncombe County, whether you're on real estate here or not, you're bringing your motor vehicle with you, you're registering in Buncombe County. So all those new folks that's moving here and moving into all those apartments, they're bringing their vehicles with them and registering them here. So the value does substantially increase with that. So I'll give you a little bit of information about valuation by your district. So you can see there how that breaks down in the total, where it's kind of allocated to. So exemptions, currently, I know it's interesting to most people that elderly exclusions were at about 4,500 residences. Veterans were at about 525. And the others, as far as exemptions, and we give you a little definition here of what that's about. And one thing to point out that I try to always remind people is that just because a nonprofit is a 501(c) does not make them exempt from property tax. Exempt from property tax is all related to use. Okay, it's about what you use the property for, not about your IRS status. Okay, it's about what you're using the property for. You can see here, I'll give you some examples of how the elderly has changed, the trend over the years. Now, you see that from 16 to 17. But that's related to the reappraisal. You got to remember that a lot of these people are getting 50% of their value excluded. So as value increases, then the exemption amount is going to increase with that. Okay.
Can you go back, I'm sorry, to the slide before about non-for-profits? So, so you're talking about what the buildings themselves are used for?
Yes.
So what would be the example of it you wouldn't have to pay versus one that would?
Well, anything that's, let's say, charitable. Okay, we'll look at ABCC. Okay, they're a charitable organization, what they give to the community, what the services they offer. So they're exempt based on the fact that that's what they do for the community. They're giving something in charity to the community. The churches, you know, they are under their religious exemption. So those are the type. There's others. There's many different ones. Okay, but a lot of them are tied to charity if they're not religious. Then they're tied to charity. So
Like in some situations, like One Oak Plaza is owned by, I think, First Baptist, that they pay property tax.
Yeah, so that's a good example. Thank you, Ken. One Oak Plaza is is owned by First Baptist Church, but they do not use it for a religious or a charitable reason. So they do pay tax on it.
If a charity operates an entity like a thrift shop that generates revenue, but the revenue funnels back into funding the charity services of the nonprofit, does the, in that example, would the thrift shop building have to be taxed?
The thrift shop, not if they own it. Now, what happens in most of the situations is that they do not own them. They rent those locations.
Or maybe I didn't phrase the question right. I'm trying to understand if a 501c3 charity is operating some function that generates revenue, but that revenue is going back into the pool to fund the charity's non-revenue generating operations.
They can be exempt, yes.
Okay, so that use would be exempt even though it was generating some revenue?
Yes, because if we look at that, they are not in competition. Okay, they're not selling their products in competition with anyone down the street. There's a lot of things that go into that we look at where the money is going. They can't be paying the money out to anyone. It's got to be funneled back to the organization to support whatever their reason may be. Now, there's a couple of things there to keep in mind is that there's two components to that for them. If they rent, then their business assets need to be listed and they will be exempt on their business assets. Or they can be exempt on the building if they own the building. But the majority of them do not own the building. And to note there for you too is that if they are not the building owner cannot be exempt just because the person using it is exempt. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So a little bit of trend for you on the veterans exemption. So that has somewhat steadily climbed since, increased since 2013. And I think one reason that we relate to this is that I think we're doing a better job in reaching those veterans. That we're reaching out to them and we're trying to get that information out where veterans know that they can apply for this and through veteran services and make sure they're helping them
Yeah,
with that exemption.
yeah.
Yes.
On the elderly, it's if you look at the veterans, it's a whole lot different than what the elderly is. And the veteran deal is, I think they get an exemption up to what, 40-some thousand?
45,000.
Okay, but the elderly's up to 29,000.
Well, there's two different things there. The elderly income could not exceed $29,600 in order to qualify for the greater of 25,000 or 50% in the back. Okay. The veterans is a flat 45,000 off your real estate value. Not dependent on, the only thing you need there to qualify is that you're 100% disabled from a service-related injury. So they don't have to qualify based on their income. Exemptions by Commissioner's District. Again, shows you a little bit about the distribution across the county.
Can you back up?
Yep.
So the big elephant in the room in District 1 is, I assume, mission.
You got mission and, you got a lot of organizations within the city. That's where most of them are located. The outlying ones are probably a lot, especially, you will see on another slide in a minute, East Buncombe has lots of religious exemptions. So, that pushes the number there. But yes, mission makes up a big part of that 3.2.
Yeah, and I would assume, government too, like this building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then.
So that's in there, government exemptions, all that.
Our government doesn't pay taxes.
Government does not pay taxes. No city
And then
account.
the one in District 3, Given, and does that take up a lot of that? Given state?
Given to Highland Farm.
No, not Highland Park, given that,
Givens is one.
is it in 1 or 3?
It's not part of the out to the operation.
Oh, she's talking about Highland Farm.
No, I'm talking about given.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's in the city of Ashland.
Okay.
Deerfield.
Deerfield.
Deerfield is too?
No, I bet Deerfield's in District 3 because it's on Hendersonville Road, right?
It is. I would have to confirm that for you, but if it's in 1 or 3.
Yeah, Deerfield. The Gibbons is in.
So deferments is the other one that affects your taxable amount, and this is your farm use. 2,400 parcels currently in the program, about 105,000 acres, $838 million deferred from value for farmers. Now, this is not exempt, okay? It's deferred. So, if the farm becomes disqualified, then the farm would owe up to 4 years in back taxes. So,
What is it, 4 years? Is that how it is?
it's current plus 3, so it could either be 3 or 4, depending on what time of the year that it happens. The ag credits. Again, this will follow closely the reappraisal, because as you see, it dropped in 2013 because the overall farm value dropped in 2013. So then it goes back up in 2017 because the land values went back up with the reappraisal. So that will closely follow whatever we're doing with the reappraisal. Total ag credits. The district. What's up?
Cities. District 3 is biggest. Not much in the city.
Do you have questions?
No, it's not. Thank you.
Non-taxable by fire district, so we split it out a little bit for you so you can see
Well, that's really.
where some of those are at. And I think that Skyland, Biltmore Forest is probably one of the larger ones, but understand that's a percentage, so as these values are smaller, and the percentage may look a little bit larger. So if you look at the overall on some of them, but that gives you a little bit of an idea of where the mix is at. So let's talk a little bit about legislative risk. So, you know, we never really are sure what's going to happen there as far as exemptions, present use value, all these things that hangs out there every year with the legislators. Present use values are ever changing. You know, they fix and put new stuff in that all the time, which brings more value into the firms. So that's a little bit of a risk year to year on where you're going to be with that. Exemptions. So let me try to give you just a little bit of an example on that. So let's just talk about elderly for a minute. So the elderly exclusion, we're currently excluding about $300 million from taxable at 4,500 residents receiving that program. So let's say that program changed this year, and we increased the number of recipients because of the income level changes to 5,500. Well, I know that those 4,500 have an average of about $78,000 each in exclusion. So you're looking at taking another $78 million out of taxable if that program was to change. And I'm not saying one way or the other if that's good or bad. I'm trying to give you an example. If that did change, what that would mean, you know, to you, and what that would mean to your rate because of the change in revenue. Saying, you know, there's been some talk for a while that the veterans would change, that we'd go from 45,000 maybe to as much as 100,000 on that. So that could even as much double what that exemption would be. I don't think that got any traction. I don't know where it's at now. Maybe it'll come back. But those are some of the legislative risks that I think that are out there for you. And then just the overall risk again. As I try and look at values and I try and estimate values, you know, what you may see, and I will caution a little bit, is that the real estate market has been very good, as you heard from someone else, not just me. But even commercial, the growth in commercial real estate has been very good because we've added many new apartment complexes, new hotels. All these things has pushed the value for this year. However, what I would suggest to you is that even the growth you may see this year is that we consider what is sustainable growth, because the apartment construction will slow down, hotels will slow down. There's no way that we can keep going the way we're going because the market just won't support it. So at some point, then that starts dropping back and leveling off. So you won't always get that growth in every year. So the other thing I want to point out to you too is related to value is that let's talk a little bit about the cycle that we go through. And as I talk to budget and give them numbers for FY19, what is included in that? So the appraisal date is always January 1 of any year. So let's say on February 1, I start a new hotel. 6 months, that's done. Well, there is no tax on that hotel until the following January. Okay? So some people have come to me and said, oh, well, that hotel is done. They finished it in September, but they didn't start until February. Then they really get a year of taxes, no burden. Okay? So that goes on in the next January. So we're always in a little bit of a lag. The way permits come on, the way we list and appraise, when our appraisal date is, when it goes into which physical budget. So there could be some lag in value. FY20 will get some residual from this year because of some of these projects being under construction. So again, even if the building is under construction as of January 1, we assess that building based upon its percent complete. So if the hotel is 50% complete and it's a $20 million hotel, we put $10 million on it for FY19. In FY20, you get another $10 million for the total of the 20. So in those first couple of years, you may get some of the value in phases before you get all of it. But as you get into the next few years, and you start capturing all that value, I think what you start seeing then is that at some point, that starts leveling off again as will slow down on that new commercial construction. So that's some of the risk, I think, that's involved. Some of the things that I've talked to people about considering as we look at the new revenues for FY19, we're trying to do projections and items on budgets, and these are things that should be considered.
Keith, I want what you're saying there on the commercial end, you're not taxing it until the next year, correct? But on residential, isn't it prorated after they get a permit?
No, it's all the same. So you take out a construction or a permit to build a residential house in February, you finish that in July, you move into it, you still would not be taxed on it until the beginning of the next year. Okay? So January 1, whatever is on the ground, January 1 is what we appraise and what you pay tax on. So there's some points in there that you could live in that house for 6 or 8 months and not have paid any property tax on it.
What about the hospital, the way it's coming up now, when it was brought on?
Yep.
You know, we're supposed to get tax on it until somebody's laying in the bed there.
That is true. Until they get the CO and the hospital is open to accept patients, then they will pay tax on that new tower. Yes.
But right now, through the process of construction, they are paying taxes, they're not paying, but they're generating an area taxes to be taxed into next year.
We actually worked this morning, actually, as you bring about this, we made a call where we worked with a person at Mission to help us establish what value was on the ground as of January 1 this year, and that's what we'll tax for this year. Okay, there was some value there on January 1, so we reach out to them and ask them to assist us in that, so they can kind of tell us where they were at in cost at that point, and we'll start then adding the value. So we add that, come the next January, whatever's there, then we'll add it. You may get most of the building the next time, but it probably will not be open for, I don't know, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but if it's not, then they'll be taxed on the full value for that.
So even if they occupy the building maybe in April of next year, at January 1, if that building is not complete, we will value it at whatever percent is complete, and we still will get tax revenue from it.
Yes, that is true.
So, okay.
Is that open on January 1?
But that's also one of those cautions that's always out there, is that you have to remember, as we put $400 million taxable, remember that at least in the next year that we're going to remove that $400 million if Mission becomes exempt. And so it's not sustainable. Okay, you may get it for 1 year, but you can't plan on having it for the future. And that's true for a lot of that. You know, it comes and goes. So we're careful as we estimate values about what's in those values, what exemption applications we have, what we know is coming up, that we try and make people aware that it's in the value and probably will come off at some point.
One other thing, Dan, talking about the apartments, the value, they're on 10 acres, say we got a 400 unit on 10 acres. What is that versus if they was residential on that property?
You know, I haven't done the analysis, but let's talk through that a little bit.
Okay.
So let's say that 400 unit apartment complex is valued at $30 million. So then you have to weigh out 10 acres, how many houses can you get on that? So if you get 20 houses on 10 acres, then the value of those 20 houses probably would not exceed the $30 million in the apartment value. So you'd have to figure out where the balance is there, or how many houses it would take to make that greater than what the commercial value would be.
But then the occupancy in a 400 unit versus a 7 residential houses on that property.
Oh, well, yes.
So,
I mean, you've increased the population on that 10 acres quite a bit,
right,
versus if it had been a single family development.
Yeah.
That is true.
And like say, all we're collecting on is maybe their property tax on their vehicle, right?
Yeah, I mean, you
And
got,
eventually someday, the residential people are gonna have to pay for that.
well, I think that's the conversation you need to have about, you know, as population grows. However, real estate construction did not grow, and they're only, those growth in those apartments is only paying property tax on the vehicle they may own, but the cost for services to support that population increases, then yes, would the typical homeowner may have larger burden? Maybe.
But the owner of the apartment building is paying property taxes.
Right.
Yes.
So as long as it's exempt from paying property taxes, it's just
Building
the
that into the cost of
the
rent.
owner rather than the
Yeah.
tenant pays it, and they embed that into the rents that they charge the tenant. Now, and on multifamily properties, are the property taxes that they pay based on the assessed value of the improvements, or is it based on the income stream that the property is generating?
Income for apartments, yes. So, you know, the other thing that does affect that is the value of where multifamily is at today. Also, if construction slows down, may not be sustainable because as the rents drop, okay?
Right, so we want to see those trend lines on affordable apartments, but high rents are actually, from a revenue standpoint from the county, are actually a good thing.
Higher
right?
rents means
Yeah.
more in taxable value.
Yes.
Anything else?
All right, really, that's very informative, thank you so much. All right, Jennifer.
Good afternoon. Keith touched on this, but I wanted to circle back to it just for a minute because I think I've heard some confusion from our taxpayers, so I want to make sure that we're all clear on the difference from tax year and fiscal year. So, as Keith mentioned, property is valued as of January 1st of a reappraisal year. So if it's valued as of January 1st, 2017, we bill it in August 2017, we've crossed into another fiscal year. So then when we're collecting for those bills, we will be collecting in fiscal 18. So, and I think we had a number of taxpayers that came in during the peak collection season, and they wanted to appeal their value. So this is why I thought this was a good point to bring up again, just so we were all on the same page, certainly as I walk through these slides. There's a number of topics through these slides, and I may bounce from tax year to fiscal year, and I will certainly try to guide and speak to each one individually so we all are getting the same information. This graph illustrates the collection rates for Buncombe and our peer counties for fiscal year 2016. The average was 99.34%. If you'll notice, we were 0.49 or nearly 0.5% above the average at 99.83. These percentages do not include what is collected by the North Carolina DMV for registered motor vehicles. I specifically chose these percentages because these are what counties are responsible for. These are what counties bill and collect, so this to me is an indication of what we're responsible for as well. So if we're considering our current tax year, fiscal year 2018, 0.1% of our collection rate equates to over $183,000. If our collection rate dropped to that peer average we looked at for fiscal 16 for our counties, that would be nearly 0.5% drop, which would be approaching $1 million of revenue reduction. I think this is important. I also want to mention, when the recession hit several years ago, we dropped 0.5% in our collection rate in 1 year, and it took us 7 years to get back to the collection rate we were at. So I think that's a good indication of what we could lose in 1 year, and then that continues for several more. We focus on collection with some compassion. We're always within legislative guidelines. We always have the goal of collecting, but we do try to offer our taxpayers a payment plan that fits in with their budget. Now that we're past peak collection period, we're very actively collecting what's left for tax year 17, but we've also set up many payment plans with our taxpayers who are already working on their 2018 taxes. So we're in effect working in 2 years very actively right now. We also offer an automatic draft option. This is completely voluntary. This is if a taxpayer wants to sign up with us for us to draft their bank account or checking account monthly. So they're not responsible for keeping up with or remembering to send us a payment. We take control of that. And then typically those that are part of an automatic draft, they re-enter those every year. So they don't have to worry about their taxes being paid come December 5th, or they've worked this out with their budget, so they feel comfortable.
Is there, an income level that qualifies or anybody?
This is anybody. And this is, the automatic draft is also one of, if one of our representatives reaches out to a taxpayer who may be late this year, they're gonna that's gonna be their first offer. Let us help you with this. Let's get you enrolled in our automatic draft program so we can take control of that for you. So I wanted to give an indication of what is the Buncombe County portion of a real property bill. This does include commercial, industrial, and residential. There were almost 120,000 real property bills generated. They represent 169.4 million in real property levy. The average of those bills is $1,414. This is Buncombe only, so this is the Buncombe tax portion. It does not include the municipalities or the fire districts or the city school district. So in addition to Buncombe, we also collect for the city of Asheville, town of Black Mountain, town of Woodfin, town of Monterey, the Asheville City School District, and 20 fire and rescue service districts. For tax year 2017, fiscal 2018, we've billed over $277 million in property taxes. Last week, we had collected $269 million. This is an indication of the types of payments we receive. This is a graph for fiscal year 2017. We received over 160,000 payments. Lockbox is an internal process. It's electronic. If you include the coupon on your bill with your check, most often we're able to send that through an electronic process that does a mass payment application. Counter payments are face-to-face interactions, or if those checks, those payments cannot run through the lockbox. Mortgage is simply if a mortgage company pays the bill, and e-pay is if a taxpayer pays online, whether that be e-check or credit card. I would like to mention as well, so the lockbox and the counter, those are payments that are processed within the office. So 2/3 of the payments that are made, we touch, we process within the office. For fiscal year 17, this is the revenue that represents each payment type. I want to continue to grow the e-pay. Mortgages, it's pretty much anything in escrow, but I would like to continue to grow the e-pay portion because that's fewer people that come into the office, maybe have to fight for parking or stand in line. So that's going to be an ongoing effort to kind of get that word out. So to wrap up, I just want to give a snapshot of where we are. So as of January 10th, now date of delinquency was January 5th, but January 10th is when we have everything processed and posted that was postmarked on or before January 5th. We were 93.71% collected. This is Buncombe only, with $11.5 million outstanding. February 9th, or nearly a month later, we were almost 97.1% collected with $5.4 million outstanding. So within that month, we collected quite a bit. There is an ongoing effort to reach our taxpayers, whether it be mailings, phone calls. So we're trying to, while we're compassionate, we're present. We're always reminding them.
Compassionate but persistent.
Yes. Are there any questions?
So are most of the conversations on the phone, do they come in? set up with your plan?
It just varies. Some people like to speak face to face.
Right.
So they will come in the office. Many of the payment plans start because one of our representatives has contacted the taxpayer.
Right.
Yesterday, we received over 330 calls to the collections division, and that was primarily because we sent out another mailing reminder that someone had some taxes due.
Can maybe you speak towards the process for the delinquency and where we were looking for? Is that, because at some point, when we get in front of the board with the notice of those unpaid bills.
Yes, so we will be advertising in March any unpaids. I sent a list of the unpaids. Kathy passed it along for me, the unpaids the first week of February. Those aren't required to be advertised, and through from March until June is our advertising window. So the notice that went out last week that I referred to, that is a notice of advertising. That notice has to go 30 days before we advertise. And then once we advertise, I expect another influx or increase in payments. And then the final list of delinquencies or unpaids will be presented to the board at the end of June.
Question asked, what's the interest rate or are the interest rate on the late?
Yes, so if the taxes are not paid as of January 5th, it's 2% that first month. Every month after that, it's 0.75%.
The first month is 2, and then it drops to
And then it
3.
drops to 0.75%.
And that's based on state
That is,
policy.
yes.
Now, are all 100% of the outstanding property tax notified, or is there if it's less than?
If they are in bankruptcy, they are not. We stand back from that. But others, yes.
Probably should also clarify on that interest that we charge, that does not come to the county, right? That is,
But the interest does.
so the interest, okay, well then there we go, the interest does come to the county.
Okay.
It's the fees.
If there are late list penalties, those penalties are passed along to the school.
You can't always go to the schools. Yeah, that's what I was trying to. That's what I was trying. There we go, don't know everything.
Those out.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. You guys feel good still?
Yeah.
Ready to talk about budget?
Yes, sir.
Big thank you to Keith and Jennifer for working with us on this, because they have such invaluable information that it's hard for us to kind of distill sometimes. Talk about ad valorem tax revenue. I'm going to talk slow because we've got a lot of stuff that move in these core revenues. So at any point in time you want to stop, you just throw something. So we're talking ad valorem tax revenue is 58.5% of the county's FY18 budget. And on this trend here, you can see that as we go through these four revenue sources, this is going to be the only trend that's going to sift upwards through the recession. So that could be growth. Keith and Jennifer can speak to that. Could be collection. But I've highlighted in yellow where the reappraisal years are and their corresponding tax rates. So you can kind of see that the frequency, I'm going to use this laser pointer, the frequency here is kind of what we're tied to whenever we do a revaluation or reappraisal. So upward trend, we added FY19 growth in there. And then speaking of tax rate, kind of wanted to look and see how we fit amongst our peers. Now there's a lot of pieces that move to this, but you can see that Buncombe County is pretty low compared to a Mecklenburg or a Gaston County, or even someone very similar to us in population and valuation. New Hanover or even lower there. You've heard us say this a lot, but constructing the FY18 budget, the value per penny given the valuation, given the levy collection rate, is $3.6 million. So expect there's talk soon from us when we start coming at you with budget stuff. Wanted to throw an example up. So I got with the folks in tax and we sifted through some residential tax parcels to try to find a mean valuation of a home. I think with Tom and with Keith, I think we've been talking about sales prices, but we're looking here at just strict valuation. If we take a valuation of $219,000 and we use our formula with our given tax rate, it's $1,183. It's $1,183 tax bill that someone could see. And then, of course, is the county portion only. That doesn't include fire districts or school districts. So $1,183. So if we take that a step further and we go value of a penny, it's $22. So that's $22 on my tax bill. Every 1 cent of that tax rate. Is that good? Everybody good with that? So moving on to sales tax revenue, we're going to be talking about percentages of percentages. So don't let me drift too far here. So we talked about the biggest revenue source. We'll talk about intergovernmental later with Diane. Let's talk about immediate revenue source. This is one that obviously is volatile to the trends of the economy, statutes, anything they decide to do in the state. 9.14%. I think it's good to note that I didn't know this until I started working here, but so if I go to a store and I pay for something, that's all going to get collected at that store. End of the month, they're going to send that to the state. So we're in month number 2. So in that month, the state is going to assess, or they're going to look over all of that, and then month 3 is going to get kicked back out. And I'm going to go into detail for each of these articles or each of these percentages of this 7 cents to try to guide you guys through what all this means. So, 3-month lag there, and Diane's going to speak to the fact that given the fact that there is a 3-month lag, if we're in the current month that we're in right now, February, we might have only gotten 4 months worth of this year's revenues in for sales tax. So we had a gentleman from the fire district come up to us at the last work session that we had, and he's like, hey, is there any way we could get those budgets sooner? And it's like, well, I don't know, because we're kind of working on, if we give them to them in March, that's 18 months ahead that we have to project this stuff. So we all know that it's 7 cents. It was more at one point, but now we're at 7 cents. Of that 7 cents, 4.75 cents goes directly to the state. Goodbye, see you later. That's not ours. Let me back up one more. I'm going to talk about Article 39, that's 1 cent. I'm going to talk about 40, that's just half a cent, 42, which is another half cent. But by referendum, we have Article 46 sales tax, which is AB Tech. Mr. Fryer knows about that. So I'm not going to go into that because that passes straight through. That doesn't stay in the general fund. So, Article 39 sales tax. Like Article 42, and I'll rehash this when we get back on the Article 42 slide, this one actually comes back to the county in some form or fashion. So we go, we pay our 7 cents. 1 penny of that's going to get thrown at the state. The state's going to go through their process, and it's coming back. 50% of that is going to go towards school capital via the School Capital Commission Fund. That's our Fund 26. The other half of that is going to go to the 20 fire districts. It's going to stay in the county's general fund, and it's going to go to Asheville City Schools, and that's based on a levy formula that we have on ad valorem. So a lot to think about there. So Article 40 sales tax is a half a penny. So of this 7 cents and of the 2, I should note that every county in the state has 2 cents that they levy. Every county, 100 counties. We've got that extra at Article 46. But, so half a cent is going to come back. 30% of that is going towards school capital based on ADM, average daily membership. The other 70% is divided up amongst the general fund, the 20 fire districts, and Asheville City Schools. Article 42 sales tax is like Article 39 in the sense that it does come back to the county. Let me back up. Sorry for jumping around. Article 40, when it goes to the state, it gets put in a pool, right? So the state has all these crazy metrics that they use, and they have some sort of index. All the Article 40 money gets pulled together, and then it gets kicked back out via population. So we might have someone come here, and then that half cent, we might not see it, or at least all of it. So Article 42, like Article 39, does show back up in the county. If I'm losing you, let me know. So 60% of that, like Article 40, goes to fund school capital via average daily membership. The other 40% again, allocated towards our general fund, Asheville City Schools, and the 20 fire districts.
Can I just interject that, as a retail hub, anything that's point of sale for us is better than per capita,
Yeah.
as we get more back.
Yeah. And you can spend all that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And that determination, whether it's point of sale or per capita, is made at the General Assembly level, always.
Right, and I mean, that was the big debate a couple years ago, right? They were going to change that, and it would have been pretty.
Absolutely. And there is so much that we can go into with sales tax. So if anyone ever has any questions, feel free to reach out. We can do that for you. So just for an overall overview discussion today, I think it's good just to touch on these points. Sales tax trends, put them all together here. We can kind of see upward swing, and then the recession hits, and we've got a drop, and then we're kicking back up. And then to pull out one in specifically, Article 39, which I believe it was talked about at a prior Board of Commissioners meeting. So what happens when we hit a recession with sales tax? As you can see, picked a point here that shows the recession, some direct influence of a recession, going into the recession. From peak to valley, it's $2.2 million lost in the general fund. So this trend should stay true in that school capital commission fund, give or take. So it's just good to point, I wanted to point that out, that as we're going through these revenues, you're going to see, except for ad valorem, you're going to see this trend down, and then stuff starts to ride back up as the economy's gotten better.
And just one comment I make on that, when we looked at those numbers yesterday, so that was, of course, like the Great Recession.
That was
This is
it.
kind of like as bad as it gets.
That was
60
bummer right
years.
there, yeah.
Like the recession in 2001, there was this kind of like tiny dip.
Sure.
So kind of like, this is very unusual.
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah, this is what they're saying was the worst since the Depression or something, so.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Right.
I just wanted to kind of pick that out, though, to see
Right, but
what
just that
it's volatile.
normal recessions, you know, which happen every
Oh,
few
sure,
years,
sure.
don't look like that.
We'll say Great Recession. We'll call this a Great Recession.
Really good recession.
So take this with a grain of salt, but I wanted to just demonstrate the volatility of decisions that we make as a body. So there's a lot of hypotheticals going on in here, but remember that I said that the money that we keep from each article gets distributed amongst us, our general fund, the fire districts, and the Asheville City Schools. So I wanted to show if fire districts, or and I'm a total advocate of fire districts, so don't let me get off path here. If the fire districts come and say, hey, we want to raise our rates, or Asheville City Schools says, hey, we want to raise our rates, and conversely, if we go, hey, we want to lower our rates, that has a direct relationship with each other. So here, essentially what I did was I took the values of this current 2017, and I applied what we adopted for the fire districts. Asheville City Schools stayed revenue neutral, they didn't change. So you can see here that our cut of the pie was $62 million, or $29 million for the general fund. And of course, I'm projecting out here because we've only got 4 months. So when I'm looking at the projections, we're like 3% growth right now, 4%. That's where we're at. So that's what I used. And then just as an illustration, like I say, take this with a grain of salt. Let's say they come and they go, oh, we actually didn't want to change our rate. We want to be revenue neutral. You can see, which in most cases was lower than the rates that we adopted. It's just an illustration. You can see that the general fund has more here, $30,144,794. So that means, had those changes that we make, these decisions that we do, where we go, hey, let's raise rates, let's lower rates, has a direct impact on our general fund, our school funding. I wanted to point that out. If anyone has any questions on this, I'd be happy to answer it. It's confusing. I did a lot of hypotheticals, but I was trying to think about how we could show this. So, excise stamp tax. Once again, like I said earlier, this is something we hardly ever talk about. 1.3% of revenues for the general fund. However, nothing is insignificant in the stuff that we do here. This is our transfer tax. So this is whenever you sell a property, you transfer a property, you're going to pay, by general statute, you're going to pay $1 on every $500. There's some examples in there, but I think the big one to keep on is just real property transfers. You can see in the recession, we'll call it the Great Recession. From 2007 to 2008, we were down 25%, almost 26%. 38.44% in 2009, but here lately, the growth has been hitting 16%, I think it was 14 15, 16, somewhere around here. So that's good. Providing the trends of the economy. I wanted to throw an example up. Let's say I have that same home, I sell that home, 224 revenue stays in. How this works is, if we're doing $1 on every 500, county generally keeps 51% of that as revenues. So just want to point that out. This is typical here. Let's look at someone like Hotel Indigo, which I think sold for $33 million-ish in 2015, and that would equate to $33,660 in revenue for the county. The other 49% would have got kicked to the state. So, any questions on that? Flying through this, I'm sorry if I am. So. Permitting revenue, I wanted to just raise this. Like I said, Matt Stone, I reached out to Matt and I was like, hey Matt, budget offices, we're talking to commissioners about permit revenue, what are you going to tell them? He said, just talk about the trends, but we'll let Matt talk about the trends later. So Tom was nice enough to let me borrow one of his slides for a while.
Seen that before.
Yeah. So as you can see, recessionary here, obviously it was down, trending back up, getting kind of crazy here. And I just wanted to show when we budget, our budget office, we budget what we know, so we would have budgeted here. So,
Could you go to the previous?
Absolutely.
So, with all of these thousands, hundreds of thousands of apartments being, constructed and permitted, I'm surprised that the values seem so small compared to, other commercial and single family permitting. It's like, there's just so much being constructed. It's like
Right.
what we're building right now in Buncombe County. So it just, I don't know, is there any explanation for why it's such a small percentage compared to these other types of permitted construction?
and this is where I kick it down the river, and I hope Matt speaks to it when he talks permits, because we're having a workshop that's straight permits, utilities, development. So he should revisit some of this, and if in the meantime you need it, I can research it.
So just not a time urgent, but if there's
Yeah.
something that's not intuitively it seems really small,
Yeah.
but
Oh, absolutely.
for some reason. Yeah, for all that that's all the apartments being built in Buncombe County, is that is the red compared to all that other stuff? It seems to be more than that. But it's not, I guess part of it is like, if multifamily property taxes are based on revenue, they're not generating revenue yet, because they're just being built. Is that part of why that might be the case? I don't know.
So now the permit revenue would come in as the permits are issued. Correct me if I'm wrong, Diane. So that would trend upwards, so you'll see that trend with
Yes,
this.
that makes
But now the actual property tax from that will come later. And that's what we try to stress with that lag there, permit, valuation, collection.
I think it's the when you buy a white car, you see a bunch of white car effects, it's like 265 square miles. Like, so we see we're downtown, you know what I mean, like where we see a greater percentage maybe versus like being out spread all over the county, you think? It'd be good to know how many of, like, the volume. Like, you have the permit value, just.
Right, you're right, there's not that many total projects, right? So there's only a few permits being pulled, even though they're relatively large projects, so maybe it makes sense.
And we have the permit data that we can pull, and I can send that to you. We have all this.
This is on the county, right?
Yes.
Because the majority of apartment complexes in the city.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's what I
So they wouldn't go through, they're not gonna go
Yeah.
through the permit.
Right.
Great catch.
That makes sense.
That's what the white car phenomenon, that's just, and the job. And the white car.
So that concludes revenues. Any questions?
Yes. Just saw that, and this has some total different from what we thought. What's gonna happen on Charter Road where the apartments partly in the city and clubhouse in the city and the apartments are in the county?
We will split it. It's, whatever's in the county will get the whole thing. Whatever's in the city, then the city will get. Okay, but they won't get the whole thing. So
They're not going to get the whole
whatever may be over the county line, then that's it. And we did the same thing with, if you know the Mission Part E building, Fletcher. Okay, so that's split between Henderson and Buncombe. So we split the value on that building. Henderson gets a part of it, we get part of it. So it's the same thing.
You do it with that.
Yeah.
We try and determine where the boundary line is at in the building, and then determine the square feet that's allocated to each county for the city.
City will get all they'll get is just a square feet that's in the city,
That's true, yes.
taxable. But like Robert said, he's heard it.
Yeah, but the city was gonna get it all, but it was permitted through the county, the whole thing.
Now that's a question for Matt as far as what they permitted in the city, what was across the city line, who permitted that part. And I bet, well, I shouldn't say that. Well, you should ask Matt that question when he's here. But I would think there was a city permit involved in that also. But that's a good question for Matt.
He'll love that question. Excellent. I'm gonna pass it off to Janet. Switch gears for a minute.
All right, thanks so much, that's great.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So if we're talking about budget, we really can't just talk about one side of the equation. We really need to talk about both sides of the equation. So I just wanted to address a couple of the expenditure side. So we've covered some of the primary sources of revenue, but additionally I wanted to highlight a few of the expenditure areas, specifically that of debt service and education. Diane mentioned earlier that we continue to work with departments around the fiscal year 19 budget development. Know that the Office of Performance Management and the budget staff continue to work very closely with departments on those requests. So obviously we'll be working on those through the months of February and March, coming to you with those. Debt service represents 7.3% of fiscal year 2018 budget expenditures. Wanted to represent here the graph depicts general fund budgeted debt, beginning with fiscal year 17 and projecting forward to fiscal year 2035. Wanted to note, so the blue columns represent the dollar value of general fund committed debt. The fiscal year 2018 amount is the adopted budget amount. This includes several items in which this board made decisions to pay for rather than finance. And based on this decision, the fiscal year 18's annual debt service decreased by an estimated $641,500, with a total estimated interest savings of $1.5 million over the course of that financing term for those items.
So when was the last time that happened?
That was at a board meeting.
So the last meeting, where you were.
No, I mean, when was the
I
last
think
time?
that was the last time it happened. That was my answer. I think it was no.
With the budget.
It's just my opinion.
I actually don't recall another time.
So for the demonstration here, the remaining years projected do not include those amounts. So we've actually controlled for those in the projecting forward to 2035. So the Office of Budget and Performance Management, we also continue to evaluate with departments 24 departmental fiscal year 19 capital requests that total a potential principal dollar amount of approximately $31.7 million. Currently accounted for in that total is $20 million for the detention facility request, as well as $4.5 million for the East Asheville Library request. It's anticipated that there will be a budget amendment request to come to you for review and consideration around the East Asheville Library prior to the end of this fiscal year. However, know that the senior leadership is due to review
the capital request at the end of February, early March, with our plan to bring that capital plan and request to you for review in April.
So just what, I mean, June's point is, that's what departments have requested, that hadn't been vetted by senior leadership, and it's not a recommended amount.
Just
So I know there are projects in there, y'all giving us clear direction on one way or the other. That's just the total request.
So it's come down.
Yes.
So then you want to bring the East Asheville Library to us in advance of the budget approval so that that can move ahead?
And at least talking through the discussion about the way you want to finance that. Kind of your options. Do you want to go out in a general obligation? Do you want to go do local finance? And do you want to do any pay as you go? What's your mix on that? So
Okay, and if there's agreement around something, then we might go ahead and do that as a budget amendment rather than in the next
that's
year's
our,
budget.
we've heard clear guidance from y'all about moving ahead with that project.
And the detention facility, that project, that would be in the budget process?
That would be in the, once senior leadership will make a recommendation to you and will bring you the difference between what departments requested and what we recommended. So I think you'll probably see it in what departments recommended.
Okay, but just from a process and timing standpoint, you're not anticipating to request a decision on it in advance of the budget?
No,
But
no.
as part of the
No,
budget?
you'll just see it when we come in on the work session on capital. You'll see the full list of requests and our recommendations. So you'll see it before budget, but not for action.
So, I don't believe in this. So the one department's asking for, about the detention facility?
It got submitted as the capital request, and we're bringing you what's on the table as requests. They've not yet been vetted. A step we're adding this year is we've kind of expanded our budget process. The senior leadership will review them and make recommendations and prioritizations. I mean, we're clear y'all done a work session on that.
Okay,
More to come.
all right.
Great, thank you.
More to go.
How do you really feel?
Right. So next is a review on our education spending from the general fund. Wanted to provide you with some trends around the most recent 5 fiscal years, specifically in support of Buncombe County and Asheville City school systems. And again, a reminder, these are general funds, so not anything related to the school capital. And out of the general fund, education spending represents 24.84% of the fiscal year 18 budget expenditures. Depicted here is each year's total contribution. The totals are broken out into salary supplement dollars in the light blue and other operating expenses in the dark blue. The one gray box for fiscal year 2016, which is $4.6 million, is a one-time dollar amount approved by the board as a transfer from the general fund to pay debt service in support of Asheville City Schools, Isaac Dixon, and Asheville Middle School capital projects. Growth in budgeted expenditures from fiscal year 14 to fiscal year 18 is 22%. The dollar amount increase from one fiscal year to the next is indicated in the text box between each column. It's disappeared from our graph now.
So just in 4 years, teacher supplements have gone up $6 million?
That would be correct.
That was the new schedule that was adopted and phased in over 2 years.
And that includes the, what we did for the certified teachers, plus the additional pay for the non-certified. It's all that together, right?
And part of the issue is as the state has continued to increase teacher salaries, all the supplements are based on a percentage.
Right.
As those salaries go up, the supplement sits on top of that.
Is it possible to separate the teachers out of that and the non-certified?
So they have to get it from the school system.
We need to do that. We've asked for it a couple times. Maybe not directly, we were just talking about a lot.
So So the supplement for teachers.
We just
and
need to see
non-
that lower pay, receive what they were supposed to
So
receive.
Tim and I and Diane have met with those systems and are clear that that's a number y'all want to see when they come in for their education workshop.
We're looking to get that information.
I'd love to see it.
Okay, we'll ask for
Yes,
it.
absolutely.
Only other thing I'd like to see in this is, how many counties are doing this? I mean, this is a $20 million supplement. And, you know, Sanderson, I like to know how many major counties.
Absolutely.
Is there, or do we have a stopping point? That's the second one. Just don't keep going.
Well, I think with the, when they came to us, I think I totally agree we should look at that. I think they did do kind of a pay study analysis in the region, looking at the neighboring counties, and that was the basis for some of the recommendations. And, and we approved what they asked for, so that's been done now. So, I mean, not to say we won't ever need to do anything ever in the future, but I mean, my sense is that we have now funded what they, school board
We
requested.
will continue to fund.
Right, but I mean, there's inflation and what the state does and things like that, but like the big increases we did over the last 2 years, I don't think they're asking us to do that kind of change, every year going forward. We've already done it.
But that number will keep, so it went up almost $3 million in a year. That's the second part of the phase-in. Well, no.
And state, the state salary agreement, again, like the factory amount of the supplement, because it's a percentage of their salary. So the state really has made some significant gains in teacher salaries over the last couple of years.
So we did that in 15 and 16? That changed? Or 16 and 17?
It was 17 and 18.
Yeah, so
So
the last
17 was the
two-
first.
the last two budgets we approved, we got
Right.
the supplemental pay.
You can see where it really bounced up.
Well, last year we approved
Yeah,
this year's
right,
budget, so we're
right,
in
right.
this year's budget.
Okay.
now.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Did you? Yes.
The one final piece, and obviously maybe important as we continue to discuss education and refine the data around that, really going to drill down into it. I did display in the very top corner data that we were able to obtain from the Department of Public Instruction on Buncombe County, Asheville City, and charter schools combined. This is their average daily membership trend from 2014 to 2018. I will say that there is a small portion, which I believe we've not been able to account for, and I'm still trying to obtain some of those numbers from DPI related to the students who we believe are attending the virtual academies, and then what is that impact in terms of the average daily membership. So as soon as we're able to obtain that, I'll forward that on, but just want to give that one caveat to that particular trend. Questions related to education? Thank you.
Can you back up? Sorry. This is for later, but, we're looking at that, we're concentrating on that big number on the right, but there was a big jump between 15 and 16 of 7 million.
In the total education funding? No, not the,
Yeah.
the change in the supplement level.
Yeah.
And part of that was that $4.6 million, which was what we were paying for,
That's city schools. Two city schools, okay. No, that was just the two city schools was in a general fund for
That was Dixon in the middle.
Dixon, and the middle school was in there, and then it came out.
it's now the school capital
When the
commission.
legislation changed for the school capital fund, and that got moved to that fund.
Yeah.
So it came out of the general fund, part of what enabled the supplemental change. So I just wanted to highlight some significant budget process changes that the county manager has made for FY19. I think Dennis already covered kind of February to March, but using existing resources, the county manager did create a performance management team, and really become a crucial part of the budget process now going forward. So much analysis is going into budget requests that just hasn't happened before because we didn't have that resource. So again, budgets and the capital plan will both be presented to senior leadership team by the end of February and March. In April, the county manager will tell departments what her recommendations are from their requests. That step was not really in place before so much. And in April, we will present the county capital plan to the board. That has kind of been hit and miss over the years. And then in May, just wanted to point out that prior to the county manager doing her recommended budget, we'll make sure you get a line item detail of everything involved with that. So wanted to take a minute and go back to revenues and talk a little bit about how we plan for like the big three in particular today. Because as you can see from the green ring, those make up about 84% of our revenues. So that's property tax, sales tax, and intergovernmental. And just go into each one a little bit. So for property tax revenue, it's really calculated by a formula. We get the net assessed valuation directly from the tax assessor, which is then multiplied by the property tax rate set by the board. Those two things combined give us the levy, and then we work with the tax collector to see what collection rate she's comfortable with. If you multiply that out, that gives us our property tax revenue estimate. So some of the risks that we see with property tax revenue, I think Keith's did a great job covering kind of 1 through 3, but of course economy and market changes, availability of land and infrastructure, legislative changes, and of course the property tax rate that's annually set by the board could be an opportunity or a risk dependent. Questions on that? So next is sales tax revenue, and we kind of talked about, Matt talked about the lag, and it also just has many variables in it. But if you look at the two calendars, next month we'll be estimating sales tax revenues through September of 19. So that's a long period with a lot of economic uncertainty. Some of the risks that could impact sales tax are, of course, in the economy. Do people have discretionary spending? Covered the 18-month lag. Legislative changes over the last several years, it has seemed to be a little bit of a target at the General Assembly, that they look at the more wealthy urban retail hub type counties like us and want to redistribute some of the sales tax revenue to the more rural areas. So we're always, that's a concern we have every year. Are they going to come up with some kind of formula change that would affect our share? And then, as Matt pointed out with his example, it is based on a percentage of the levy, the sales tax is. So if we don't keep par with the other entities that are receiving sales tax, our share would then drop the following year. And the municipalities are part of that equation too. So there's kind of the larger universe, which is us and the municipalities that set a percent, and then the smaller universe within our percent is the fire districts and the Ashland City School District.
Question or just, well, I guess a comment. So have we ever measured the percent of homeowners that actually own their home in Buncombe County? Because at one point in time I heard that west of exit 44 that 30% of people own their home. Well, if that's true, and if that's going up or down, that's a little bit of a forecast of discretionary spending. Because I mean, the more cash flow that you have, the more you tend to spend, not the more you tend to save. And so that's part of that calculation when you see like Ashland outlets, and they come and they didn't just pop all those stores off of I-26 because they could see it from I-26. That was part of it. But also part of it was they felt comfortable enough with the discretionary spending in Buncombe County to bring that big machine, sales tax machine there. And it is, I mean,
And mean, I don't think,
been successful, so.
we don't know if
Pulled
the
it
rating-
before, around bond rating, and it's, Buncombe at that time, and that's been years ago, had a higher percentage of homeowners who flat out own their home with no mortgage than
But
other.
it might be worthwhile to look
I hear
at.
ya. We'll go back and
over
see what the
time,
source was.
You know, and maybe, it may be even worthwhile to look at some areas or by district or by,
I hear
you
you.
know, locations.
And you make up a good point, the natural outlets, I mean, another big driver of this is tourism. And when people come here, they spend money, and, you know, people from other places are funding some of our
Severe
revenues.
again, you know, support it.
Right, like more than a third of the sales tax revenues are from people who don't live in the county, right? Or you know what the stat is, it's more than a third of it.
I haven't heard that.
We'll pull it.
You can pull that.
I've heard it recently.
I know one of the discussions, one of the discussions we've been having is, and Les and I was talking about this last week, is how can we do a better job projecting the sales tax revenue? And because especially there is that 3-month lag, but the one thing that there is not a 3-month lag is the occupancy tax, right? Since we collect that ourselves, so we're gonna see if there's any kind of direct correlation between occupancy tax collections, and if it goes down, it's the sales tax court. So sort of for us, sort of an economic indicator is the economic engine starting to slow down some. So those are kinds of things that we hope to get into over the next several months to sort of what are those drivers and how can we measure them to get a predictive, to do some of our predictive analytics.
Do we get anything from collecting the occupancy tax and doing all that?
Just a fraction percentage to cover the cost of that.
And how much is that?
About 125?
Yeah, 25,000, it's about, yeah.
Third and the 1 month money?
How much we're collecting in occupancy tax, about 20 million, 19 million, or somewhere. Yeah, that goes to tourism development. So that doesn't come to the county, that goes to tourism
I know.
development.
Yeah, if you want to see a sharp trend line.
But so we do all that for 127?
You good on that? So intergovernmental revenue, aptly named, it comes mostly from federal and state government. I will say that because it's governmental, it's always a risk of legislative changes. I think our experience has been when they feel squeezed by a tough economy, then they like to share that pain with local governments. It can also mean funding delays, and there's been a lot of talk about government shutdown lately, and if our revenues get held, we still have no choice but to provide mandated and essential services. There's a natural disaster. I remember when we had Hurricane Lloyd and Ivan, I think it was, several years ago. We had to spend money in that year, but we didn't get the revenues for quite a while. And of course, it's tied to expenditures. So typically, we don't get the intergovernmental revenues until we've had the expense to get a share of that back. So we did also want to talk about expenditure. Jen already talked about the debt service shown in dark blue there at the top. We're able to go ahead and calculate the baseline debt for the budget because we have our current amortization schedules. And then once the capital plan comes to the board in April, we'll get your guidance on what projects you want to move forward, and then we will adjust the budget accordingly for the anticipated debt. You've also seen the education trends, which are outlined in the green. We always closely follow legislation for that, like the K-3 class size initiative, which seems a little hopeful that maybe it might be phased in instead of all at once. And also, as we talked about, the state salary and benefit impact has been large as well, so we'll follow that, but really don't know until May, or sometimes even into June. So that leaves departmental requests. Those are still being worked on and will be presented to senior leadership team between now and March. And all the directors will be in attendance for their piece so they can speak to their budget and their requests. Common theme, some of the risks to expenditures include the economy. That would be true because sometimes there's an inverse relationship to the economy and the services we provide. So if there's an economic downturn, more people come to us for service. also the inflationary impact on our salary and wage, and also the services and products we have to buy to do county business. Another thing we've seen several times in the past is unfunded mandates from government agencies. They want you to do something, but they don't give you any money to do it, so that has an expenditure impact. Kind of a global issue that affects our budget is health insurance inflation. I think everybody's dealing with that nationwide. So I did want to mention we have a multidisciplinary team that's looking at that right now and try to form some strategies going forward. And then, of course, just any kind of unexpected event can also impact. And then when there's hurricane in the Gulf and shuts down the pipeline and fuel prices spike, things like that. So in terms of balancing the budget, as you would imagine, the state legislature says we have to have a balanced budget. And if you look at the left-hand side of the equation, we've talked about both expenditures and revenues. When you do subtract those out, they never equal zero. There's about 1,300 expenditure accounts in the general fund and 159 revenue accounts, and just with so many variables, that's never going to equal zero. So really, what you do with the gap typically is appropriate fund balance and see if that's something that you have the savings to do, and that's the strategy you want to use. So if our goal is to lower fund balance, you look at the bottom section, there's a couple ways to do that, either lower expenditure appropriations, increase revenues, or some combination. Well, we certainly during the FY19 budget process want to true up any revenue and expenditures that aren't appropriately budgeted. I'd always advocate that you still need to maintain a level of conservatism given all the inherent risks that we've talked about today. If we're too aggressive in our revenue estimates, then and we come up short, then we would spend fund balance. If you're too conservative in your expenditure estimates, then it limits your flexibility. If there is an unexpected event, it could also lead to a budget violation if you overspend your appropriations. Again, timing is kind of an issue on expenditures too, because the last time the board meets in the fiscal year is June, but we have expenditures that keep hitting the budget until August, so that can also be a little bit of a risk. I do want to take just a minute and talk about appropriated fund balance. This chart shows the adopted amount that we've used in the last 5 budget cycles, and as you can see, the FY18 amount is quite a bit larger than we've done in the past. However, this budget year, 2018, the board has taken action. These are all the budget amendments that have happened for fund balance this year, so we have been able to reduce it almost $1.1 million, primarily from the board's decision to reduce the economic development incentive. And when I give you the budget, the actual update on February 20th, the monthly update we're starting to do, I'll discuss how our projections are shaping up for this year. I will say in budget, we are constantly reviewing your actions and legislation, making sure revenues are coming in on target and expenditures are staying within appropriations. So this is Bill Ryberg, and just wanted to point out, I'm sure you know this, but in North Carolina, we're just very fortunate to have the UNC School of Government, a great resource for us in all the various disciplines in local government. And he is the director of the MPA program and also their resident budget expert. We invited him to be here today in case you had any questions on budget processes or fund balance, but he had to teach classes. So he sends regret, but he did share some materials that I'll share with you. So this is just the legislation. GS 159-8 just shows that adopting fund balance is a legal method and goes into a little detail about there is a legal calculation of the maximum amount that you can appropriate in the budget. Also wanted to just show that appropriating fund balance is a common budget tool among our peer governments. This is FY18, and it shows the population, the general fund budget, and the fund balance appropriation. And and then fund balance as a percentage of expenditure. So even with our historically high amount that we budgeted in FY18, we're still kind of middle of the pack there. And I did go back and look at their FY17 financial reports just to see if it's common for governments to save everything they appropriated. And I think it was, Gaston did not have theirs published, but of the remaining 8 million and us, Mecklenburg about broke even. One spent about 1.2 million, and the rest were anywhere between 9 million and 19 million added to fund balance. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. So Bill Roggenbach has a audio clip we're going to play just covering the reasons for fund balance, and thought this was kind of a great segue of how fund balance bridges both the budget and financial world. So we'll play this, and then are you the master of that?
I think so. I'm the clicker for this. Max put it on YouTube for us, so you guys can watch it at home too.
Over and over.
Share with your friends.
I've provided you with 6 reasons, and there may be others, for why local governments should actually carry cash reserves in the form of fund balance. The first one I would probably consider absolutely the most important, working capital. Given that local governments collect its major revenue source, as you know, property taxes, one time a year, and need the necessary working capital to cash flow for the remainder of the current fiscal year, but more importantly, the beginning of the next fiscal year until you can collect the next rounds of property taxes. And I'm really thinking about the months of October, November, of December, where your cash reserves can become very low until you collect the next round of property taxes. For the local governments located on the coast, you're absolutely going to recognize this next reason: emergencies. Responding to the fact that local governments must even spend resources before reimbursements can be obtained from FEMA, for example. Of course, we need cash reserves as a source of capital financing. And I really want to emphasize this because a local government needs to maintain a sustainable balance between debt financing and pay-as-you-go financing for acquiring capital assets. We don't want to rely totally on debt, and we don't want to rely totally on our cash either, for that matter, but we want a proper balance between to bring on the necessary capital assets to move our communities forward. This balance takes us to the next reason as well. It's also highly recommended by the bond rating agencies when they want to see a nice balance between the two, and rating agencies want to just see an adequate fund balance, again, as I've already mentioned, about reducing the risk of a local government over time. The 5th reason I want to mention is local governments often use fund balance for balancing the budget. They may use fund balance for a particular capital expenditure, for example, or they may just use it to close the gap. They get within a small amount to balance the budget, and they put in an amount from fund balance to close that last $50,000, for an example. And this is widely used, particularly within our larger local governments. And I want to make a point here, and when I'm training elected officials, I also like to really talk about this point. Just because you use fund balance to balance the budget doesn't necessarily mean that your fund balance is going to decrease at the end of the fiscal year. Once you get to the end of the fiscal year, regardless of whether you use fund balance or not to balance your budget, if actual revenues exceed actual expenditures, your fund balance is actually going to increase. And then finally, in North Carolina, this is absolutely critical. We want to maintain adequate fund balances to avoid receiving a warning letter from the LGC, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a couple of slides.
Thank you, Meister.
Very well.
So that concludes the budget piece. If you don't have any questions, I'll turn it over to Tim for the finance piece of fund balance.
Tim has about 3 minutes worth of discussion, so. So if you're thinking you want to take a break, if you want to just hold on for 3 minutes, then it'll be. Because what discussion is not complete with the CFO talking about fund balance, because I know we've talked about it so many times, but really this sort of just plays well with the discussion that you had on budget. So really, so I think you've got a handout that does a better job of, so basically what I wanted to walk through is just the different categories of fund balance together. Does someone have like a presentation available?
Hold that thought. Hold on, guys.
Yeah, so I want to confuse you all by, let's guess the number. Let's just go with that right there. Okay, let's use that. Here we go. Let's use this instead. So, we'll use that. We'll just scroll down. So really what I want to do is just sort of highlight what the fund balance was at the end of the last fiscal year. Because it is broken out into 5 different categories. I think we ended the year with about $77.6 million worth of fund balance. And so those categories are really sort of broken out into sort of broader categories. So the non-spendable, which are those things that cannot be spent, which is usually prepaid items or inventory. So we've got, I think at the, I believe it is at the landfill and general services, we have fuel reserves, and so we measure that. So I think it worked out to be about something like $58,000 worth of fuel reserve. So that is part of the fund balance. The other part of fund balance is the stabilization by state statute, which basically is that part of our fund balance that really has already been spent. We've already incurred liabilities. It's where it's already been spent on something else. It's just showing up in our bank account, so to speak. And then we've got committed, which is something that you as a board have committed the county to spending already. So part of that, the $2 million, is part of the early retirement incentive program that we had a couple of, I think that was the 2015. So we've still got a few more years of paying out those people who retired early. So this year's is in this year's budget, but then there's going to be cost in future years. So that is just that future year cost, is all that is. And then we've got the assigned, the $15.3 million is actually, the assigned is the appropriated fund balance that we use to balance the budget that Diane just talked about. And then the unassigned is the $37.7 million, which is really basically unassigned. It's there as reserves. If you want to go to the next slide. So normally when we have those discussions, we always talk about our reserves. We are always talking about what we measure as the available fund balance. So we take out that stabilization by state statutes, and we take out the non-spendable parts. And also part of that committed, I think, is also those capital projects that we've already specifically, we have those capital projects that we already know we're going to spend. But so the available fund balance is actually $55 million and that is really what when we talk about reserves, that is what we talk about as reserves. So when we have discussion, I know sometimes we throw them up, we throw that bigger amount, $77 million. That is technically correct. That is our fund balance. But when we're talking about reserves, we really want to talk about those things that you as a board, we as a county have control of, and we can actually come up with the cash to use in other situations. Next slide. Again, just sort of give you some trend information. We ended fiscal year 2017 just a little bit above where we projected, and so we're looking. And so at the end of the year, as a percent of our expenditures, it's 18%. Again, your policy is 15%, which is about two months worth of operating expenditures. The state's requirement, and I use that loosely because it's not really state law, but what the state recommends, the LGC recommends, is 8%, which is about 1%. No one is around that 8% level. I will say if you are in that 8% level, you probably are going to get one of those warning letters that Bill had just mentioned, or you will get a visit from the local government commission. And if you want to go again, and again, if you want to just look at where we are in regards to our peer counties, you will see that as a percent, we are down here at that 18%. We are among our peer groups, we are the lowest as a percent And so I think we're right where we should be. I think the 15% policy is a good policy. I think one thing we should note, if you go back to that slide before, because I think it's important. So looking at our budget projections, and Diane and I are going to be going over with you at the next meeting, sort of budget projections and where we are at financially. It is sort of looking like that this year we are going to land where we're going to have to probably eat a little bit of fund balance, just a few $100,000. How that affects the available fund balance for next year, we're sort of projecting out anywhere between, will be 16.8% all the way up to about 18. Let me go back to that other slide. Well, 16.8%, anywhere between 16 to 18.5% is where we're going to land.
What are your thoughts on why counties like Durham or Mac might maintain such a higher percentage?
So that we have looked into that, and so some of it is they built that into their policies.
And what's the argumentation for why you do that?
It's
as a
their
policy?
comfort level. Some of it, I think, we'll go back to that other. Well, I would like to have said that New Hanover would have been higher because one of the things Bill said was catastrophic events. I mean, it's just those different things that you want to use that available fund balance for. I mean, some of it, that's the way they manage it. That's where their comfort level is. Our sense is the 15% range and where we have been historically, which is averaging around, I think, 18, 19% historically, is a reasonable place. One of the things we need to be careful for, we were having that discussion with the fire departments, and one of the fire departments, they had the reserves a little bit too low, and it affected their cash flow. So part of it, again, our cash flow is not level across the year. It spikes in November, December, and January, and then we have to spend that money over the course of the year. And so our expenditures sort of spike throughout the year as well. So we need to make sure that we have enough reserves, enough cash in the bank to cover payroll, to cover all of our regular expenditures.
Is this an issue where you see there's really different philosophies in camps and it's CFOs debate this
So
till the hours of the
I
night?
would tell you that there's not really big discussions on it. I mean, we seem to like to talk about it a lot. But it is, it's that balance, it's what boards and what governments are sort of comfortable where and there is that balance, and the balance of, do we have enough cash to make sure that we can run successfully and make sure that we are addressing, the need for some catastrophic event or cash flowing, carrying us to the point where we need to finance some debt. Those are.
That's helpful, it's just a big,
Yeah.
it's a big,
It is a big.
I mean, they do a lot of school building.
That's what I was saying. They also don't have a dedicated source for school capital. Counties are
Yeah,
still.
Wake-
So they might make that.
And one of
Wake doesn't, but Wake had their fund balance was low.
their appropriated fund
Their
balance.
appropriate fund balance
0.1%,
was
right.
0.1.
So they run on the
They're
wire.
money in, money out.
Yeah.
So the budgets that we've had in the past, you go back to the slides, got your percentages on. When you, the other.
They keep going back, right?
Too fast.
I'll go up to
Whoa,
79.
whoa, whoa. No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't throw up.
There?
No.
You're talking about 5-year history of appropriated fund balance?
It's a line. Show the percentages.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
85, yes.
Oh, okay, so 2008, 17.78, 18 point, whatever. Yeah, here, but what's the budget? What's the dollar budget in 2008? What's the, is that a $250 million budget compared to a $400 million budget?
It could be, but we're operating just on percentage, so as a percentage of the.
Right, but for the discussion, it's about the dollars. I mean, we can have a percentage discussion and say it's 15%, and it's more than a 3-minute conversation, by the way. But, yes. But 15%, I'm very concerned that amounts too high. We wrote that as a policy. We're keeping it as a policy. We've not adjusted that. Anytime you set a policy and you've not adjusted it for 10 years, it's probably a bad policy. So we need to look at that.
So I think the policy, just for clarification, was about 4 or 5 years ago, where we said 15%. 50%, yes. It was about 5 years. It was in a budget amendment budget ordinance that I read. Within about the last 5 or 6 years, I can find it for you. But I think, but again, based upon, I'll get it for you.
Okay, so either way, it's, to me, I think we have to challenge that number. I think if we're gonna have an appropriate tax rate, and we have spending that we can, justify, then I think we have to look at the fund balance. It's continued to grow quite a bit. We need to make sure it's sustainable. But I think that's a number, though. I think that we need to look at.
So for illustrative purposes, for 2017, the 18.39%, the difference probably between that 50% policy and the 18.39% is about roughly $5 million.
I think it's a lot of money. So,
but you get a settlement, there's a lawsuit, you have a major hurricane event, fire, catastrophic event. It's a risk. It really is what we're comfortable from a risk standpoint.
At the same time, it's not direct to you, it's direct to you. It's okay, just understand that. It's that, families are in risk every day. So if there's an opportunity for us to challenge the fund balance, look at the fund balance, and it possibly affect the rate in a responsible way, then the families that are struggling get help to them. So that's why we have a conversation. So
sure.
And I know you get that. So
I absolutely.
And I think that this year it'll be a bigger conversation than in previous years.
Well, I think I actually said in May to the manager, how are you talking about a tax increase when we're not addressing the fund balance?
Yeah.
When we're asking people to pay more money, and yet we have so much. I said that in May.
So this is a good conversation, a big conversation that we need to continue.
I think the question about why different counties do different things, I think I would like for us to look into that more, because I don't want to carry unnecessary fund balance either. But the data shows of the 10 lowest counties, we have the least fund balance,
right,
but for one. So we need to look at this carefully and thoughtfully, but there's something going on there, and we are at the very low end of this right now. So we do need to be cautious about becoming. if we reduce it very much at all, we would be the lowest. And so I think we need to think more. Intuitively, I don't understand why these other counties that are even much bigger than us are carrying such a big percentage, because it does seem like they're just keeping a lot of money in the account for reasons that are not obvious. So, but I would like for us to, to kind of explore this further so we get a sense for, is there something that they're thinking that's not kind of obvious within our organization about why they're carrying that? And
it is a balance. That really is. It really is that balance that we're looking for.
But we'll ask the questions. I think that's a good point. It's reaching out and better understanding it. And I hear you say, Commissioner Boucher, you want to see the budget, the percentage relates to when that trend down.
Well, the other thing, I'm going to, there was 2 comments made, which I'm going to agree with both of them. Commissioner Farrar asked the question about what do these others do. We really didn't have an answer. So to what you said, I would like to know.
We'll find out.
We know that Wake is spending, if they build a $40 million school, they just build a $40 million school. They don't have sales tax. They don't have the things that we have. Mike, I think Commissioner Farrar, Vice Chair Farrar mentioned that earlier. And so, we need the answers to that question because.
And we'll get you the dollar amounts too. So we always talk in percentages.
Just because it's our policy, doesn't mean that we need to do.
Right. I know yesterday one of the discussions that we actually had in the School Capital Commission Fund is, does the School Capital Commission Fund in turn keep a reserve to make sure that we can cover those costs, or do we rely upon the general fund.
Right, right.
To be that reserve for our other funds. I mean, so there are lots of sort of moving parts to that.
Well, you got the school fund, I mean, you got school board, you got, reserves there, and ours, we have to.
Right. I do know that the rating agencies, I think one of the metrics for the rating agencies is about, they like an available fund balance of about 30%. Is what they're looking for. So we really are on the lower end of that. And I feel comfortable where we're at. I'm comfortable keeping us anywhere between that 15% and the 18% because I think we do have really good metrics in place and really good folks keeping an eye on how we're spending our money and keeping an eye on that stuff. I feel comfortable with that. I would start, just me, would be a little bit more uncomfortable if we were starting to go lower than the 15%. I mean, I think the 15% is a solid.
Yeah.
We haven't been that, but we've
But-
never hit 50.
Right. But if you, and I look at it as if we go with this, for example, let's say we decide that we don't want to use as much appropriated fund balance. That means that we don't have as much appropriated fund balance, and then we spend all the way up to that budget. That could potentially affect our reserves moving forward.
So let's talk about that
If
for
we
a
have a
second.
catastrophic event.
So that's the other thing that, and I know we've talked about this before, but I mean, that's been the one budgeting process I have never been, it's never made sense to me and never been really comfortable with it, that we annually project this large fund balance use and routinely do not use it, right? So, and I know that you're saying other counties do it, but to me, it just seems like we are sandbagging, a bit more than we should, in terms of just, hey, let's it's kind of like the wall we were talking about yesterday. Like, let's put the worst case scenario in there. We know it won't be that bad, but I would, to me, I would like for us to try to kind of dial in what's viewed as sort of, a more realistic, expenditure over the course of the year. If some things come up and we need to do an amendment and appropriate some more money for things that come up, then I think we can do that. I think we should have some reasonable contingency, but to say we do, $8 to $15 million every year and then routinely don't need it. To me, it means we're fudging it more than we should. That's
Just more precision budgeting.
Don't we hold fund balance for both the stores like $20 million?
So the schools have the fund balance, yes. We don't hold it for them. And there is that discussion as well. Are we their contingency? Because all the fund balance that the schools have is a result of the money that the county gives to the schools. Because all the money the schools get from the state, they have to use all that money. When they don't use, it goes back to the state. Any money that the county gives to the schools, any that they don't use, the schools keep it. And it goes into their fund balance and then for them to use as they determine moving forward how they see fit. So,
Has he used any of theirs?
they have, yes.
I
Yes,
think
they have
3
used
years
some
ago,
of it.
maybe?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
That's one of the things we're asking them to address in their
Yes.
workshop is their fund balance trend and what they have used it for and when. Because that's something commissioners bring up every year and they've really not given us much information.
right. And so one of the things that we did for you with the fire departments was keep gathering all their financial information over a period of time. We're doing that same thing with the school systems now. We're taking their financial information and so we can sort of drill down so we're not always having to ask them the questions that we are trying to learn their systems and how they are spending so we can better inform you all.
Is it possible to find out, like, when you just said, we give them money, and then what they don't use goes to their fund balance, is there a way to find out why we give them extra, it seems? Or do we do that often?
I think that we're asking them to talk through, I mean, we've never required them to report on how the money we give them is expended.
Right.
So that's part of we asked you all about questions you'd always had or wondered about, and we're asking each of the systems to come in prepared to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, schools are a third of
Right.
your operating budget, and we need to have better information on how that money's spent. Not saying that they're not spending it inappropriately, it's just, we just need better information so we can make better, we can provide you better information so you can make better decisions about how.
and on the, sorry,
I think if we're going to look at the fund balance and really, because it's only fair to tax base, let's face it. Because when we're carrying it too high, and I've said this before, it's affecting what people are paying. But if we're really gonna look at it and be fair about it, we've got to include the school fund balance in there. We gotta look at the total fund balance, all funds are going in there. Because when you add what the schools are holding over there, it's actually higher than 19%.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. One of the things we do from the NCACC, they actually, there's a list, and it shows all the school systems throughout the state that have fund balance and what those fund balance levels are. So that's not unique to Buncombe County. Don't you think that we're the only county schools that do that? Every school across the state has some kind of fund balance.
And the thing that, the question on their fund balance that I would be most, that rises to the top for me is, you know, because the expenditures are not even across the year and the revenues are not even across the year, you know, their fund balance is currently like around 10 or 11 million or something in the neighborhood.
The county schools.
The county schools?
Yeah, I think combined they're close to 20, that's on top of.
The city and county? So, but, you know, they make this point that, like, you know, hey, we have times where cash flow is tighter. So I would really like to see over the, you know, last few years, how tight does it get, like, during the tightest parts of the year? Because I don't think we want to be in a situation where, for, like, you know, for routine things, you know, paying teachers, you know, routine expenses, where they really are at risk of running out of money, and they have to come to us, and, I mean, we don't want to have to deal with that.
We do from
But if it really doesn't get that tight, like, okay, the tightest it ever gets is $9 million, then it seems like there is a conversation to be had.
We make level payments to the school systems with the exception of the county school, where they give their supplement payment in November. So in November, we make sure that supplement payment, we send them a big chunk of money, about $15 million extra in November to make sure. So we sort of help them.
We
cash flow.
levelize it out, so it's not swinging that much. Okay,
Yeah, so it's, we cash flow some of that, so otherwise, they get level distributions from us, and I would imagine level distributions from the state, but I don't know, I really don't know what their cash flows look like, so I don't want to.
So we will ask for that, and we have said to them that these are the same questions you're asking of us about county operations.
Yeah, it just seems like every year, you know, there's this pattern. They come to us with their requests, and there's always some stuff in there that's like important, you know, that we want to do. And we wanted to do stuff around teachers, certified and certified. But then it gets kind of blended in with this debate about can they take it out of fund balance? And we're always so late in the process that I feel like we can never get to the bottom of it. So I'm just hoping we can kind of get ahead.
There's always that big squeeze because you all have so much you have to decide and process there at the end, and we really never get to sort of dive into and delve into it.
Well, when Joe and I were trying to get the information about the non-certified, it was like pulling teeth. It was, you know, it was really hard. And it went on, didn't it, Joe?
I don't know why, but it just did. We have not got the information since that budget was adopted to show who got what. I may be incorrect on that.
Well, and I'll say, the years that I've been involved in finance, we've had a decent relationship with schools, but we never really have, developed that really good relationship. I think through the School Capital Fund Commission, we really have had sort of more involvement with them, and I think we're developing those relationships. So hopefully that more collaborative process will be able to share.
This isn't just information, okay? This is not, us and them, or this is just information. That's all it is. It's just a piece of paper.
I think that's the way we framed it, and we met with them early to talk through these issues with their CFOs and their budget managers, which has not happened in the past. So we've had a meeting and then scheduled a follow-up meeting with each of them. And I'm sharing with them the issues that they can expect to be asked and please stay in touch.
I think that's a peculiar culture in that, like, for instance, we fund the sheriff's department, fund them, but yet when we ask questions to both entities, it's not met very receptively.
There's There's no doubt counties in the state of North Carolina, some things they have lunatic problems. There's no doubt.
So just one comment on Hush, which will probably surprise y'all, but on percentages, we don't, it's not necessary to see graphs. So let's go back to the graph that shows us the best in the world. Okay? I don't necessarily want to see those. I think it would be good, I mean, it's over there, okay. What I'm saying is if we want to find somewhere where we're winning, we can do the slide. Now, it's not saying we did that, but a deeper dive might show that that's not necessarily the way we should be comparing ourselves to everybody else. I don't know. I'm just saying that if we answer the questions that was asked about, how do they measure theirs, and, let's really dive deep in that. So
I think there's a lot of
we can
learning
really see where we're
opportunity
at.
for us to talk to those other urbans about how they manage those.
And we can give you dollar amounts too. That would be, I mean, this is just really the standard local government metric that is used that we get. So, but we can certainly be more creative.
I've always wondered how late, they're like $1 billion budget, 1.2 billion.
So, yeah, so I would suspect that whatever they're at, 17% is probably, hundreds of millions of dollars versus our $55 million.
But it wasn't on the slides before. It was 800 something.
But that was the fund, that's the appropriated fund
That
balance.
was the
That's, I
appropriated
like the
fund
way
balance.
they're doing that.
Right, that was
doesn't-
them using appropriated fund balance.
They don't do it.
Yeah,
They project
Right.
their actual budget,
Right.
and they probably,
right. They run tight.
Can you, the tax rates for Durham and Cooper, can we see those again? Or is that-
Tax rates?
Yeah.
Bear with me here as I scroll.
The Mecklenburg meter one.
So now we have to keep in mind relative valuation budgets per capita, which we have. Some of those get a little skewed outside of us. So where we are is New Hanover, Durham County. Yeah.
the thing that I think needs to be kept in mind when you look at this is that our real estate, our real estate values are high. So, this does make us look very good, but if you have the same house in Forsyth County that you have in Asheville, it's going to be worth half as much. And so you might be paying a higher tax rate, but the check you actually write to the county might be less.
And they don't have Article 39.
Right, one of the interesting things when we were talking with Tom Tavie was that the cost of living really isn't that much different, but real estate really was a bigger difference in that cost of living factor. I still haven't got my hand around that. What makes up the difference? Grocery. Yeah, but it seems to me that it couldn't be that much of a swing, but that's.
Question everything. That's exactly what we do. I said the
So $5 million, if you want, how, what'd you say you want? Well, $6 million would take us roughly to about 14.5% of available fund balance. So that would drop us below the policy.
What now? What?
Commissioner Fly said he wanted $6 million.
We got 75 million.
No, so we have 77 million, that is total fund balance, but of that 77 million, what we call available fund balance, which is that money that we are available, is about $55 million. So if we gave you $6 million out of that, we would be probably below the policy of 15%.
Yeah.
So, other questions, thoughts before we wrap it up? This has been great, ton of information.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, all right, thanks, everybody. This was really, really great, great session. So if there's,
So we can, there's some information that we worried about.
We have 2 pages filled up with items for follow-up.
Andy, Rachel, anything else we need
I
to do?
don't think anything else.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.